Hi, I'm Beretta here, and in this video we're going to see how to obtain graceful deformations through skin weight painting in Maya. We will do so using as a case study a character modeled by Saichuk Yaje. I hope I am pronouncing this name correctly. The character has been rigged by David Hallows in Advanced Skeleton, and David finds himself in need of some skinning help. We will start by evaluating the topology of the model first, and then we will examine joint placements and pivots. After that, we will block out the main skin influences so that render and animation testing can be performed while we move on with refining the skin weights. Once we will achieve reasonably functional deformations, we will perform one last pass to obtain graceful deformations. This last pass will also include face skinning. In our case, the face rig is joint-based, in fact. In the process, we will learn how to export, import, mirror and relax skin weights, as well as how to transfer skin weights between different geometries with different topologies, like for instance, clothing. We will also see how to mask skin layers, and we will learn the importance of rig calisthenics while skinning. We will also see some notable differences between version 1 and 2 of NGskintools. By the way, I really suggest you download and install both versions. While the rig you will see in this video has been built with Advanced Skeleton, the workflows we are following are applicable to whichever rig you work on in Maya. This video comes with chapters so that you can skip to whichever subject is relevant to you. If you're interested, just follow along. Before rigging anything, you really want to have a look at the model just to know which kind of problems you're going to encounter and whether it's a good idea to start rigging already or not. In this case, the model starts with some obvious intersections, which are probably not going to get better when rigging, so this would definitely need fixing before rigging. This ring in here is definitely going to be intersecting even after rigging. The face, very important in my opinion to have a face which is sort of neutral before rigging. Face neutralization is an interesting topic, and in fact I'm going to release a video about that quite soon. If I wanted to have this guy in a worried expression, it would be really difficult to do that, mainly because the rig was done in such a happy pose that I would have to push the rig quite a lot to get to a sad pose. And a similar thing goes for the eyebrows. They are so far high that it will be unlikely for us to be able to push them a lot more without having to also affect these top bandana that we have on top of the head. This expression is great, don't get me wrong, it is actually quite nice. It's just that if we want to go to the opposite spectrum of this emotion, it will be easier to do so if we started from a rig which wasn't already smiling. Let me show you what I mean through a much simpler example. These two shapes are identical, the only difference is that the green one has been skinned in a neutral pose, while the red one has been skinned in a more artistic pose. Surely, the pose of the red one looks nicer. They share the same joints and they share the same animation. And both have been skinned with the default settings and their weights have been relaxed through NGskintools. But see how different their behavior is. While it would not be impossible to tweak the red part's skin weights so that they would produce the same deformations of the green geometry has been skinned in about 30 seconds and it can achieve the whole range of poses, including the neutral and the artistic one. You can't beat that. This kind of detail as well is kind of problematic at times, because it means that you will have to skin the geometry with a lot of precision to make sure that this narrow line is preserved, whichever position your arm or shoulder will be in. You can certainly do that, but it will take more time. While this kind of effect can easily be done when texturing with a displacement effect. So using displacement to achieve these details will spare the riggers some rigging time, and also will give more flexibility to the texture artists because they can now decide how thick and how thin this line has to be regardless of what the rigger is doing. So that gives you a great deal more of flexibility. Similar thing for the trousers line. These trousers have this very nice line going down along the side, but again, this translates into a bunch of vertices that we will have to skin very precisely before they deform the way we want. If we get lucky, the first pass of skinning will work just fine, but if we get lucky. In Italy, they say that luck helps those who prepare. So I think it would be better for us if this were a displacement map rather than actual geometry. Then a thing that will be fairly problematic will be the sleeve on the elbow. Now, normally you do not put sleeves on the elbow because if you put a sleeve right on the elbow, it will make it difficult to deform the elbow itself, to bend the arm. So usually sleeves are held right above the elbow line or right underneath so that the elbow can freely bend. So right now the problem is that this sleeve is right on top of the elbow, and I think it will be very hard to get nice deformations on the elbow without compromising the volume of the sleeve itself. So this is more of a design problem than a model problem. The sleeve in here should just be a bit higher so that we have the elbow visible, or a bit lower so that we have the bend on a place of the shirt that doesn't have a particular detail. How to deal with this belt? Now this belt, apart from the intersection, this belt is fairly thick. That means that it will greatly limit the ability of the torso to bend, unless of course you want to bend the belt as well and just make it lose volume, make it compress, which is going to be a challenge considering that the buckle isn't meant to be deforming, it's meant to be made of metal. This is going to be an interesting one to solve, I think, in rigging, because it will greatly limit the ability of the character to move around, to bend the torso. Please notice how when we smooth the part in there, we get some very strange geometry going on for us. This raises the question of topology consistency, for which we have some parts which are very dense, like this ring here for instance, and then some other like this cylinder which are not dense enough, or maybe even the button in here, you see. So in general, modeling for animation works better if there is a certain consistency of topology, so that every piece of geometry will have more or less similar amount of densities, so that if we have to animate two pieces together from the same character, they will deform in a similar way because they do have a similar amount of density. Right now this is less of a problem because of the fact that these parts are not meant to deform, but I am looking for instance at this part down here, this leather part of the gilet for instance, and it's going to be fairly difficult in my opinion to ensure that this part here, this sort of U-shaped part, is going to deform like the gilet underneath, because they do not have the same amount of tessellation. In this area in particular, you see we have two lines going down, but only one line on the leather part coming out, so the leather part won't be able to bend, while the underneath part will be able to bend. Of course, this kind of stuff you normally discover after you rigged a few characters, you realize that the problem. At the very beginning, it's very difficult to know all the issues, and I'm pretty sure I'm missing potential issues in here. A similar issue with the color up here, not in terms of intersection, but in terms of detail. And if you really need this kind of detail, then maybe it's easier to rig geometry which is plain, and then you just put displacement map to draw these lines here, because this way you have less work to do in rigging. Then if I look at the color itself, it's a pretty snug fit with the gilet, and in fact you see it's intersecting. If this is intersecting by default, it means that when you will animate it, it will be very difficult to avoid intersections. In fact, probably impossible to, unless you start to create additional controls. The model is great, but there are a few things that could be improved just for the sake of easy rigging and avoiding intersection in animation. If facial expressions are very important in this character and you want to have a good range of emotions on this face, it would make sense to go back to before the facial rig was made and grab the model and just clean the smile and the eyebrows so that they will look a bit more like a neutral expression. This way you will be able to reach both emotions, both happy and sad emotion, a lot easier. Right now, this skinning is half done by David, and you see that when we raise one leg, the other leg also moves. That's a common issue when skinning. The very first skin you make will often have these problems, but don't worry, there are relatively easy fixes that you can apply to achieve a good result. There are also other issues with the armpit area. You see the skinning on the armpit area is a bit interesting there. I expect the neck will have some problems as well, and you see that the chin stays behind. So these are all typical issues that you encounter when skinning a character, so nothing really out of the ordinary. Hopefully I'm going to show you a method to avoid these problems. Now I'm looking at the heel roll, and you see that the heel roll doesn't really work that well. Now this might be a pivot problem with the joints or a skinning issue. Before touching the skinning, it is important also to do a pass and check the pivots. If the joints are positioned in places that do not support graceful deformations, then you will have a hard time skinning, because it doesn't matter how well you skin, you're still going to get weird deformation. So I'm going to have a quick look at the joint system. This rig being made with advanced skeleton. It means that if I select the master, I will get the ability to show the joints by enabling them in the master. If the joints are too small, I can go under display, animation, joint size, and just increase the joint size in there so that the pivots will be a lot more evident. One thing I was noticing when I was rotating the control of the head is that the pivot of the head seems to be fairly high up there. I would have imagined myself putting the pivot somewhere down here at the base of the chin, somewhere like that position probably will work better than this one. It's very hard to evaluate the difference now because of course the deformation doesn't help, but I think I would prefer a pivot down there. The neck base rotation, it's usually better placed if you put it underneath the actual neck base, because the actual rotation of the neck part starts usually a bit deeper into the chest. So I would have imagined to put my neck down here somewhere instead of this high up. One thing which is peculiar to advanced skeleton is the pivot of the pelvis of the swinger. So we want to have a look at it just to see how it works. The problem is that you see it's very difficult to understand where the pivot is because the control has its own pivot, which is not so intuitive, I must admit. Usually the pivot of the swinger is more or less where your navel is. It seems to me that this could be a good swinger position. This seems to be well picked as a position. I want to check the chest position, and the chest is a bit too high in there. I mean, the chest control is usually used to rotate from the base of the rib cage up. So in fact, this chest should probably have been somewhere down here, I imagine. Somewhere like here. This probably would have been a better pivot. So as I go by, I write down my notes because I will want to intervene. The clavicle ideal pivot, in my experience, is roughly around where this pivot is. I mean, I usually put it a bit, maybe a bit closer to the center, somewhere over here. That's usually my preferred pivot, but I don't think it's going to make a massive difference, to be honest. From the side view, I usually prefer to have it closer to the front of the chest rather than to the center of the chest. So maybe I will move it as well. Let's have a look at the arms themselves. To evaluate pivots, one can rotate parts, right? But are we going to rotate every single joint? I don't think so. I think one thing that we can do is open up the advanced skeleton tool, go down under the tools section, and in there you will find the animation tester. The animation tester will take care of rotating every single joint to show you the effect it has. If I click on it, the advanced skeleton tool is going to go through every single joint of this hierarchy and is going to rotate it. This is very handy when skinning. Normally, this is done by an animator. The animation that we would get would be called calisthenics or yoga or gym animation, depending on the place where you work at. And the idea is that you have a character which is already animated and you just skin the weights on the animation and you see how it deforms. Because remember, you will not ever see the skin weights on a T pose or an A pose. You will always see them in an animated pose, so it makes sense in my opinion to work straight off that. In fact, as you see that now we have all motion, we can evaluate the pivots a lot better. In fact, we can evaluate the twist, and you see that's what I was talking about when I was talking about the problem with the buckle and the belt. And it just takes an automatic tool to diagnose a problem in here. You don't really want to spend much time just to get to the place where you diagnose a problem. You want to get to diagnose the problem as soon as you can, as quick as you can. The other interesting bit would be the joint of the thigh in there. If you check the model, it feels that you essentially have two options about that thigh. One is that the thigh bends around this area of the screen where my cursor is. The other one is that as you rotate the joint from up above in here, this geometry is deforming gracefully up and down, and the thigh geo is essentially sliding on this half sphere, which is an unlikely feat in terms of advanced skeleton. We just don't have that capability, I think. I would probably end up going for a pivot which is a lot lower for the thigh, and I think I will put it somewhere over here. It will deform a bit like Woody's from Pixar's Toy Story, because right now when the guy lifts his leg, you see that the leg becomes all deformed in a way which is not really nice. I think this is an area that will require some testing. I don't expect to be able to find the pivot at the first run at this. The knee joint in there seems to be a bit low. I mean, if you check the topology is telling you the knee joint is somewhere over here probably, and the rotation should happen around that pivot, and that should give you a much better deformation. So I will have to write down knee as well in here. The ankle. In terms of rotating up and down, the pitch rotation looks okay, but I would imagine that the pivot of the ankle would be a bit more anatomically correct if it were somewhere over here. So I think the ankle as well probably needs some attention there. Now let's have a look at the ball of the foot. The ball of the foot seems to be about fine. In here we don't have a clear pivot for the roll of the heel, so it's something I will have to check afterwards. To get a good deformation, we definitely need the joints to be in a location that facilitates that. So that's why I'm doing this round before I even start skinning. Let's go to the top view. The position of the shoulder right now seems about fine. If I imagine that I want to lift up the arm as much as I can, this is the pose I will try to get there. That sort of works all right. It's going to be interesting to sort out this problem, I think. But overall, I think the position of the shoulder is correct. If you check the elbow right now, it's rotating up this way, and I would imagine the elbow to rotate on an axis which is parallel to the palm plane. So I would imagine the rotation of the plane to be somewhat like this and the rotation to happen that way. That's how I would have expected it. So let's have a look at the hand itself. The hand pivot seems to be alright in a way, but if I look at it from the profile and I rotate my hand in the webcam, for instance, you see how the pivotal rotation is well behind the palm. It's not really into the palm yet. So I think wrist rotation would work better if the pivot were a bit more inwards towards the forearm. I would probably change that as well. None of these problems are really party poopers, if you see what I mean, but if piled up on top of one another, they will create a problem here, a problem there, and you will find yourself fine-tuning the skinning quite a lot. And since your character is already fairly high density and has a lot of areas that will need extensive testing, you do not want to add on top of that with pivots which require custom skinning to work. You really want to get those pivots right as soon as you can. Let's have a look at the face. There is no auto animation for the face, I think, that I can put on with advanced skeleton. So the eyebrows are quite functional, apart from the fact that, as I said, they should have been probably neutralized before starting the rig. The position of the eyelids joint is quite cool, I would say. It seems to work pretty nicely, although there is some intersection where blinking down. Let's see if there is a blink attribute in advanced skeleton. So this is a blink attribute in advanced skeleton for the up lid. And let's see the one for the lower lid. Or maybe we can use lid out. Actually, this works quite nicely. Ultimately, we have overall good control over the blink. It would have been nicer if the blink was locking shut. But again, if it's a mid shot, you may not notice the fact that the blink doesn't quite close. The rotation of the eyes seems to be alright. You see that the pivot of the eyes is not really right in the middle of the sphere. So it's a bit offset. And that's not necessarily going to be noticeable, but as you rotate the eyeball, you might generate unwanted intersections with the eyelid if you don't match the pivot of the jaw. The positioning of the joints of the lips seems to be accurate. I don't really have much to say about that. This is a particular character. It has a massive jaw. Normally, by default, I put the jaw pivot somewhere down here at the base of the ear. So this should conclude our check for pivots. So remember, we did a check on the geometry, then we did a check on the pivots, and then now we are ready to approach our skinning and decide whether we can go skinning or whether it's better to just fix the pivots. So you see, before even diving head on into the skinning process, this is a good idea in my opinion to have a look at the model, see if there's anything that could make our life better, like for instance neutralizing the face, and if there is anything that could make our life easier, like moving the pivots to places that would automatically give us better deformations. Right now it seems that the model is in a good shape, although it's a bit too smiley in the face. I wouldn't feel comfortable to send this into production because of the smile. I would ask the modeler to neutralize the expression before rigging it. In terms of action, you just need to go there and just make that face not smile anymore and rebuild the facial rig so that it's lined up to the new facial expression. In terms of big parts, big chunks of the geometry like the buckle and the belt, they will need to be tested because there is really no way to know right now how it will work. And then in terms of different density or geometry like this area, well, you will need to see it while skinning, but it would be a good idea to have the same density throughout the model. The small lines in here, well, right now we have to work with them, but it would be better if they were made with displacement. I'm going to open Advanced Skeleton again, and as I said before doing the skinning, I want to tweak the pivots a tiny bit. So into the body section of Advanced Skeleton, I'm going to toggle Fit Advanced, and this gives us the placement joints. If I hold down D on my keyboard, like Delta, I can move a joint without affecting the children. That makes it a lot easier to move joints around. So this way I can move the joint a bit closer to the front of the chest the way I like it. I'm going to grab the neck joint and I'm going to move it down vertically. I want to keep it on the vertical line, a bit deeper into the chest, just so that I get a pivot that is more anatomically correct. This is not necessarily the best choice for this model, but I just feel like I would like to start at least with my best practices and then develop an approach specific to this model afterwards. I would really like to have the head pivot a bit closer to the connection between ear and jaw, somewhere over there. Again, it's not going to be making a massive difference, I think. And then I have some qualms about the position of the chest. Remember, I thought that the chest was a bit too high, so I'm going to move down the chest quite a lot to what I believe to be the base of the rib cage. And then this one, the spine one, is going to go down a bit lower, say in the middle between the root and the chest. That's probably going to affect the swinger, the hip swinger, so I think it's a good idea before moving forward to rebuild the rig and see if the swinger is still working. So I'm going to rebuild the rig and I'm going to test the swinger. Is the swinger still working okay? It seems to be. So I'm going to go back to the fit skeleton there, and remember we have to do a test for the hip, for that thigh, which I thought was a bit problematic. So again, I'm going to move it down. See how I move joints on a single axis to begin with? So I'm going to move this thing down to where I think the first pivot should be. I will first try the Woody from Pixar's Toy Story approach, and then I will try to have the swinger, to have the thigh a bit higher up. This knee needs to go up there, and I am a bit worried because this knee is pointing out quite a lot. It doesn't really match what's going on at geometry level. You see, if I rotate the thigh, now I'm rotating the whole chain. So if I hold down D like Delta and I rotate the joint pivot there, then now the axis is a bit more in line. But this one isn't, so maybe let's not rotate the pivot. So I want to maybe rotate this chain so that it's a bit more in line with the geometry itself. However, I thought that the ankle position was sort of okay, apart from needing to be put a bit more centered and higher up, but I think overall it was working. This heel joint needs to be right at the edge of the geometry because that's the heel pivot for the roll, remember? I wanted to have the toe a little bit forward and a bit lower. I will get back to the leg in a second. This joint down here is the joint that will be used as a pivot to side twist the foot. It should probably be placed at the most extreme thickness point of the foot, if that's a way to describe it, that is. And a similar job I will do for the other joint, this one. So the foot will side twist around those joints. The toe end joint is the joint around which we will lift the foot when tiptoeing, so you want it to be somewhere over here. Of course, this is a bit tricky because if you put it here, the foot will pivot around the toe with the toe not being even on the ground. If you put it down here, the foot will pivot around this joint, but the toe will be rotating around that imaginary joint. So I will put it on the geometry just because I don't know any better right now. Now I will need to rotate this whole chain down here, the leg, the thigh and calf, so that it's matching the geometry, because this is a bit strange as a rotation. If I de-rotate with delta kept pressed this way, I'm going to rotate only that joint. If I rotate regularly, I'm going to rotate the whole chain, then I have to counter rotate the ankle. The point is, when you build an arm or a leg chain, you really want to first orient the whole of the leg chain and orient it like the geometry so requires, and only after you're done you go around and you position the ankle. Otherwise you end up redoing the ankle a few times before you can actually start working. So the ankle in here will need some love again. Hopefully it won't be much work, but it's always a good idea to check from all points of view. And you see, sure enough, this isn't quite working. So let me orient the ankle so that it's vertically up. Let me rotate it flat to the floor. And there you go. More or less, I think we are now there. So this is, in my opinion, a bit better. I feel a bit more secure knowing that the joint chain of the leg is aligned to the geometry. Speaking of which, remember, we really wanted to align the arm as well. I think I would expect the elbow to be bending parallel to the palm surface, and right now that's not what's going on. So if you break the planarity of an arm chain or a leg chain in traditional 3D software, you open the door to possible problems when using IK in your animation. Generally speaking, this joint, and this joint, the shoulder, the elbow and the wrist are usually resting on a flat surface. So I think I will make them straight, because you see they are not straight. So the problem is that you will normally discover the issue while animating, which is not a good way to discover issues. So I will grab now this middle joint and I will just move it down vertically and snap it to the shoulder. I will grab the wrist, move it up vertically and snap it to the elbow. So now I know for a fact that this is indeed a straight chain. I should have done that check for the leg as well, but really this was supposed to be a skinning tutorial. Now we'll lower it down and you see that sure enough, this works out of the box. So not bad. So now I'm going to check, and now the elbow is going to be able to rotate parallel to the palm. Now this palm is rotated all over the place now, unfortunately, because of the work we've done. But sure enough, I think I can rotate it until I get the fingers in the right position. And I think I will need to reposition the fingers a little bit more. The thumb pivots usually is deep into the palm geometry, somewhere over here, very close to the wrist. And again, you see how the thumb joints are all rotated in a weird way between the first and the second one. Well, usually you do want the thumb to be straight, because this way when you animate, you use a single axis and you just bend the whole thumb. Instead, in here, when you animate, you will be forced to use several different axes to get to your pose, which will make animation slower. And slower animation is usually worse animation because you have less time to do what you wanted to do. For now, I will just sort of align them to the thumbnail, which is your reference point for the rotation of the thumb anyway. So you want them to be straight, more or less, and to be rotating all along the same axis. Now you see, if I use a single axis, I can bend the thumb all right. In general, I prefer to have this joint sticking out a little bit. Now, there is no indication on the topology to tell us where the joints should be placed. So in here, we are just eyeballing it. It's going to be very difficult to create a bump on this part of the phalanx, on this articulation, because there is no topology and we are going to need to reverse the curve in there of the geometry For any other finger, same thing. I will first align the first joint and I will rotate it so that it matches the topology of the geometry, and then I will go in there once I'm happy with the position, probably here I imagine on the knuckle, just under the knuckle, and then I will go in there and using a single axis I will position the joints on the phalanx junction, and that seems to work alright. I will fast forward here and just go through all these fingers on my own. And there you go, we have the joints more or less in place. We said head, chest, neck, clavicle, knee, thigh, ankle, wrist. Please notice how as I work I take notes because there are so many things to keep track of. It becomes very difficult otherwise to work. Let me rebuild the skeleton, and now we have our skeleton back, and I'm confident that now the controllers of the elbow will give me a nicer rotation, which is a lot more anatomically correct than it was earlier on, and so will the legs by default. They will bend in a more organic way, I think. Now let's have a look at the heel rotation there. It seems to me this is a problem of skinning because otherwise the heel should rotate perfectly around the pivot that I elected for it. So I think in there I have a skinning issue. So now that we fixed the pivots, we are ready to go skinning. I'm going to start from scratch just to show you the method I follow when I skin stuff. And then at a certain point I will be at the stage of fixing it if you think of it. But now I want to start. So in terms of skinning strategy, I think I want to skin first the main pieces of geometry and then and only then the rest. Instead of having a single geometry in there, I may want to split the geometry into bits and bobs. So I will first of all delete the history while the character is in a T-pose, and then I'm going to go mesh, separate, and that will give me a bunch of individual pieces. And then I'm going to grab the hands, the central part. They are all different bits and bobs. That's going to be interesting. The hair as well, why not? Even the bandana on top. I'm going to add it to the same skin cluster. This guy as well. The feet. Oh, that's a different piece of geometry as well. Oh, that's going to be interesting. So these guys. These bits and bobs I can skin later. Right now I just want to have only the core part of the geometry. This part, I think I will add it as well, just because underneath there's nothing, so I think I want that. So that's the part I will start skinning with. I will just combine them again, and I will delete the history, just put them under geo again. This is going to be body geo. That's my geometry there. Now I will select the deformed joints, and then I have the body selected anyway, and I can just set the bind skin options. A max influence value of 3 could be okay. The max influences value is the number of joints that can concurrently affect a single vertex. I think I will go for 3 just to see how it works, and I will hit bind skin, and now I am back to square. Now I still have the animation there. All these parts that are left behind, I will just hide them for now. I don't need them. I first want the skinning to work this way. Now the first thing you need to understand about skinning is that taken in its default form, skinning assigns an influence value to a vertex, which you can find under General Editor's Component Editor Smooth Skins. If you select any given vertex of your geometry and you check the Smooth Skins tab in the Component Editor, you will find that each joint is represented with a maximum of 3 joints in this case, as I previously explained. In this case, the right hip joint is moving the selected vertex, this one, with an influence of roughly 35%, while the root is taking over 50% of influence. The root part 1 is having an influence of about 11%. So most of the rotation will be given by the root, and then second in charge is the hip, and third in charge is the root part 1, which I don't think we really need. Now the total skinning weight by default can never exceed 1, and by default Maya won't let it, although there are ways to exceed 1 in terms of skinning influence. Another thing that you have to understand is what happens if I change this value. If I set this value to 1, that vertex is only going to be moved by the root, which is this guy, and you will quite notice that that vertex moves in a different way if compared to the others, because it's now the root that is moving it around. It won't move with the thigh any longer. If I move up the thigh in there, you will find that that vertex you see stays behind. You have hopefully understood the connection between these values that we have in the component editor and their effect in the viewport. We added all the influences to the root earlier on, but the question is, what happens if I now set this value to 0? Where will the weight go? And the answer is, it could go to hip R and root part 1M. It could go there, all right. And in this case, it does, you see that. But it could also go somewhere else, depending on the situation. Which is why, in general, we prefer not to subtract influence from a vertex, but we prefer to add it. Because by adding it, we know perfectly well where the weight will go. By subtracting it, we do not know on which joint that vertex will go. That's the first golden rule, probably, of skinning. You work by adding weights, not by subtracting them. Although, if you know what you're doing, you can indeed subtract them. This animation that Advanced Skeleton made for us is sort of okay, but if I remember well, Advanced Skeleton has a walk cycle generator that we could use. If I go under Tools, I can go into the animation tester and just remove the body animation there so that I don't have testing animation anymore there. And then I can go into the walk designer, hit start, Advanced Skeleton will do its math while we will wait. And now we have a character walking. And this way we can already have a look at the various deformations as they literally walk, right? I find this is a quick way to start evaluate the character in animation a lot better. You can of course even make it run. There you go. You can decide the characteristics of the walk. Right now, I'm happy with what I have in here. That's good enough for me to start working. Right now, I will start the skinning with the basic tools in Maya, and later on, I will move on to NGskintools, which is a tool I will explain a couple of things about later on. So, skinning in Maya. Let's close Advanced Skeleton. I will go into rigging, skin, and I will go into options of paint, skin, weights. Usually you start from the root, so I will grab the root, and I will just make a much bigger brush in there. I will set the brush to additive. Remember, I want to add influence. I do not want to remove it. Because the problem is, if I add it, I know I'm adding geometry to that particular joint, this guy in here. But if I am removing, say, by scaling it down, I don't know where this weight will be going. They may go onto any joint which is up here in the spine. They may go to the hip. They may go even to the arm in certain situations. So in general, I do not ever want to remove influence unless I know what I'm doing. So I will increase the opacity and the value, and I will be pretty rough with my skinning there. I will just add influence, and immediately as I look into this, I feel like I could have separated the gilet from the hip. Oop, I accidentally skinned stuff there, you see? That's how you create problems. There you go. It's not a big deal anyway. I will only skin half of the geometry so that I will be then mirroring the skin weights later on. So I will go around, kind of feel like I will remove the gilet from the main skinning. It's already getting in the way. So I will go back into Advanced Skeleton. Now the trick when you do this kind of work is you want to be able to do a quick pass, and then if something gets in the way, you want to be able to go back quickly to the walk designer or whichever thing you're using and just remove the animation. And this way we can now go back into the T-pose, delete the history, separate the geometry, put the gilet into the old body group, we don't need it, and then recombine the geometry. I am doing so because the idea is that if I get this visible part to be properly skinned, then I will be able to transfer the skinning from the visible part back to the gilet. Hopefully that is. This is going to be my new body geo. So you see, the key in here is going back and forth quickly. The key isn't really to do a wonderful job. That's a byproduct of being able to go back and forth and iterate quickly. The wonderful job is usually a byproduct of something else. It's not necessarily the result of a direct aim. Now I have my geometry, I can select the deformed joints, the geometry, and just bind it the way I did earlier on. So you see, in a few minutes we already bound this geometry a couple of times and we have no emotional attachment to it. We are quite happy with what we have. And again, I'm back to do a walk. Really, really easy if you think of it. Look at that. That was easy. Now let's go back to skinning. I don't need the advanced skeleton tool any longer there. And as I said earlier on, only in additive, and I can use a pretty big brush in there. With B and left mouse button, you can decide the scale of your paintbrush, and I go around and I just add influence to the root. Usually professional riggers that I know of, they start by adding all the influence to the root, and then they just go joint by joint and manually add influence to all the joints. That's one way of doing it for sure. I'm not going to follow that way, however, in this exercise. I'm going to try and do it my way here, although the rigger way is certainly working. I don't really have anything against that. I think it's a smart way of doing it. There you go. And then I'm going to grab a bit of this chest geometry so that it moves a bit more with the root in there. There you go. And that's going to give me the deformation. Then I'm going to go up. I'm going to start with the spine first. I'm going to up one joint with the root, and I'm going to add a bit of influence to that one joint. You notice this is the first bluish joint of the hierarchy. The others look like they are selected, but really they are not. So this is going to be my second joint. And then I'm going to go down the hierarchy. See, I start always from the root, and then I go up the hierarchy, or down rather, the hierarchy, and I add influence. Now, probably want this thing to be a bit more condensed there. I expect this part was working fine even earlier on. And spine 1, this is probably a bit higher in terms of influence. It's going to affect those bits and bobs there. Just the top edge loop, something like this. And then the spine part, again, is going to have a bit of an effect there at the bottom and at the top of the waistline, something like this. And then I'm going to go spine part 2. I'm going a bit fast, you see. I'm not very meticulous with my work in here. I'm just trying to get to a decent result quickly, and then I will fix it based on what I need. So in here, I am interested in a graceful deformation of the chest area. This part will be essentially allocated to the chest, this whole part in here. This part of the back also will have a fair amount of chest influence. It's a good idea to start thinking which part am I going to mirror to which part. In here, I don't mind adding all the influence of this geometry to the chest, because I know that later on I'm going to add it to the clavicle anyway. So if I add it to the chest, at least I know it belongs to the chest. That's going to make the skinning a bit easier, hopefully. And same thing for the base of the neck, which is going to be fairly interesting to skin because of the fact that it's composed by a number of different pieces of geometries. So I will maybe even go all the way up to the neck geometry in there. And the problem with multiple geometries is that sometimes when you skin, it's very easy to forget spots. You see on the inside, very easy to forget the cavities there. There you go. So now I have my geometry in there. This is all chest area, but I know that I will be going there and do some maintenance on it anyway at a later stage. Then I'm going to go into the neck. And you see that now the neck is practically not affecting the chest area anymore because I gave all the influence to the chest. See how I'm always adding. I'm never really taking away. So now the neck is going to have a little bit of an effect, I think, in this area at the base, which I want to replicate on the chest as well. And I think I will need to do some custom animation on the chest and neck anyway, because the walk itself won't be enough. You see now by rotating the neck, I don't have much effect on the chest, but just a little bit, which is okay. But you see how the fact that there are two different geometries creates potential issues in there, but we should be fine anyway. So certainly if I am skinning the neck, this top part should go with the neck. It should move quite a lot, in fact, with the neck in there, and certainly all these inside faces of the actual neck geometry should move one-to-one with that neck joint. And you see these lines in the middle there, those I flagged as a potential problem. They are indeed creating an issue because now it's very difficult to get them. It's all the problems that we flagged as potential problems are already coming back at us. There you go. In here, you just want to make sure that you skin the interior of the neck as well as the exterior of the neck. There you go. And then the second neck part, this one in here, I'm going to add influence. Maybe I'm going to be a bit rough there and just add a lot of influence, and later on I'm going to try and just move it procedurally and see how it works. You can follow this workflow whether you're just fixing your skinning or you are starting anew. And in here, the jaw system will need to be given some love. This area for the second part of the neck is going to be a bit tricky because of the topology going down diagonally on the jaw. So I will just add a little bit of influence. And then there's the head itself. For now, I just want the whole head to follow along and just skin the whole top part to the head itself. If this were a separate piece of geometry, if I kept it separated, I could just flood the geometry with the value of 1. I'm ignoring the facial rig altogether in here. There you go. So that now no facial joint is affecting the head and the neck, hopefully. The idea is that that should make it easier for me to make sure that the general body works in terms of skinning. And once I'm happy with that result, I can go around and just tweak the facial skins, or I could even import the facial skins from the previous skin run and just layer them on top of the existing ones, which are null right now. There's nothing there. I'm doing the hair because I don't think it's symmetric. There you go. So that's done. Now I'm going to check the deformation, and so far so good, but that was easy. Let me save before it's too late. And let's go down to the legs. So I will go hip R, the R side, the right side is the one I'm skinning. I'm going to just grab this area and quite brutally, I'm going to skin it this way. I'm going to go down one joint. The idea is that I will smooth the weights later on, of course. Skin that, this guy, skin it, and then the knee. The knee will need some calisthenics before it will work the way we want. We'll add a bit of influence in that area just to get to a smoother solution already. I can move the timeline and see how it bends. And you see, it's so useful to have calisthenics on already on this rig because it gives you an idea which deformation you will get. You can add a bit of influence in this area and then just move the timeline without losing the tool, and that will give you a better understanding of what to do in there. In fact, a much better understanding. I'm just going to gently spread the weight in there, and you see I keep adding weights. I never really quite take weights away because I don't know where the weights will go if I just remove them. Remember, they may go to the right joint or they may not go to the right joint at all. So hip part 2 and knee are. And you see, sure enough, I highlighted this line as a potential problem, and sure enough, it is a problem because now I have to manage it with a lot of attention, which otherwise I wouldn't have to. That's a bit of a shame because it adds unnecessary minutes, if not hours of work to your workload. I don't mean to say it doesn't look good because in fact it looks really good, but I just mean to say it could have been made easier to skin. This way, sort of okay, I think. So we are getting there. So let's have a look. There's a bit of a bump in there, but I don't know where it comes from. Let's see. Oh, there you go. It's this guy that probably will need a bit more love, but so far so good. The ankle down here. This ankle area needs to be skinned a lot more to the ankle. This needs to be pure white. So this needs to move 1-to-1 with the foot. The ankle joint in 3D tends to work both like a heel and an ankle joint. I think this is an intersection that was already there in the original model. So I go around, there you go. And make sure that everything is nice and white in there. There you go. And then I go down to the toes and I start adding weights to the toes. And then I will probably smooth this thing later on. Now let's go up and see what happens in here. This part really needs to follow the knee 1-to-1. So I'm going to be pretty aggressive with the skin weights there because it needs to move with the knee. I do not care if I accidentally skin the other leg because I'm going to mirror the weights later on. So I really don't care. Remember, we favor an approach that lets us iterate fast rather than an approach that makes us do perfect things the first time around, which, by the way, is practically impossible in my experience. There you go. Forget about the left leg. I know it looks nasty, but in here we have some issues because it's hard to understand what's going on in the geometry, but I think we are more or less okay. You really need to look up the sleeves of a character and look for gray areas which you might have forgotten. See there? There you go. And now down here I've been a bit too aggressive, so I'm going to the ankle and I'm going to go and skin the ankle a little bit better. Something like this will work. Nice. So now the arm, I'm going to do the right side. So I'm going to start with the scapula. This area here really belongs to the chest, I think. So this part should belong to the chest deformation and only to the chest deformation there. Oops, sorry. So I'm going to add it to the chest deformation. In here, I will need some specific calisthenics to make sure that this works. So I could even go as far as skinning this whole part to the chest. so that I keep the volume, and then go and add it to the scapula gently. I'm going to do that gently. I'm going to start in here and just add some influence to the scapula. Given the situation up here, I probably don't want the scapula to affect this area because it's a different piece of geometry. So somewhere over here, I think this will be enough, and then this area will be affected by the scapula as well. So by adding the weights to the chest, I sort of cleaned the influences so that they wouldn't be moved by the arm anymore, but by the chest instead. And then to preserve the volume as the arm is down, you can skin this part, the scapula as well. There you go. Something like this will probably work, I think. Or a bit lower if I have to continue the skin weight that I see on the scapula geometry. And then I go down to the shoulder and I start skinning the shoulder. In this area in the shoulder, the walk is no longer a good way to look at it. So I'm going to open up again Advanced Skeleton, go into the tools, the walk designer, and delete the walk. I don't really need it, and I can save and I can perform an animation tester. Oh, there's a tester for the face, and I will wait for Advanced Skeleton to do its magic. There you go. And now I will be able to go on, and there you go. And now I have, you see, a tester that works specifically for our situation, which is what I wanted to begin with. So you see how I use the different set of calisthenics depending on what I need to skin. This is the wrong arm. There you go. This guy is the right arm. So I'm going to add skin weights in there. I'm going to just, you see, move the timeline, skin, move the timeline, skin. And you see how I always add. I never really remove the weights. Because by adding, remember, I know what I'm doing. I know where the skin weight is going to go. By removing, I have no clue whatsoever. I really don't know what's going on there. There you go. So that's going to maybe work for me. In this area, you have to remember that you can't move the arm straight forward unless you move the clavicle a little bit. So this action made by the arm alone, it's a bit ambitious, but I can maybe add a little bit of influence around this area so that I get a bit of a nicer deformation when rotating forward. A little bit of a nicer deformation. Maybe this area as well. You know what? I will procedurally smooth the skin weights. Then I'm going to grab the second joint and add influence to that second joint. Whoop, I accidentally skinned the leg. And then just going down the chain one by one. The elbow, as I anticipated earlier on, is going to be the source of many a frustration because of the fact that it just shouldn't be there. That geometry shouldn't be there. It's going to deform in a non-graceful way no matter what I do there. So you're going to have to accept a bit of a problem there, I think, due to the way the model is built. It's a great model, it looks really nice. It's just that normally you wouldn't put a sleeve in that area in real life because it would make it difficult to rotate the elbow. So I'm going to just spread the skin between the two joints, between the upper arm and that of the elbow, and I will just have to be happy about what I get there because there isn't much I can do really to fix this. The topology of the sleeve itself does not lend itself to graceful deformation, an elbow bump for instance. I would probably need to go isolate select at a certain point and just skin those parts as well. I'll go down the forearm and just skin the forearm as well. Then I go down the forearm once more, skin it once more. I'm being a bit generous as I add influence to the forearm. Then I will remove it anyway with the wrist and I will save. Now it's time for the wrist, so we'll just add influence to the wrist a little bit in there. David, who provided me with the original file, already skinned the fingers and the face. So I want to show how to use NGskintools, which is a very useful tool for skinning. I will talk more about it later, to import the skin weights from another model and then only use part of those weights. In this case, maybe the fingers or the face. I think I skinned the whole body from toe to head. Now, to mirror the skin weights the usual way, in Maya, the traditional way, you need first of all to be in a T-pose. That's very important. And then you need to go under skin, mirror skin weights. So first of all, it asks you for which plane you want to employ. Now, if you look up at my webcam, I want to show you something. The idea of mirroring skin weights is this. You imagine you have a plane which is right here in the middle of your face. You're mirroring the weights from one side to another. Just like what you would do to see your face in a symmetrical pose, you would put a mirror right here and then the face would look symmetric. You're doing exactly that thing. Now, a plane is identified by two axes. So, for instance, If I were to make a plane in here in Maya to simulate the mirror you've just seen on the webcam, this one for instance, now this plane would be defined by two axes, which I can find here on the bottom left corner of the viewport in Maya. One such axis is the vertical one, which lines up perfectly with the y-axis, and the other one is the z-axis, which you can see here. So the two axes we're going to employ are the y and z-axis. The other thing that Maya wants to know from you is, are we going from negative to positive or the other way around? If we check the grid at the bottom of the floor, any value that is pointing towards an axis is positive. So you see that x is pointing to the right in this case, and any value that is beyond this line to the right is a positive value. Now we skinned everything that was on the left hand side, and that is negative. Anything which is not pointing towards an axis is a negative value. So we are not going from positive to negative, but rather the other way around, negative to positive. And right now that works as it is. Now, as a surface association, closest point on surface should work for us. The default settings should work. I hit mirror and I need to select a geometry, right? Otherwise, what am I going to mirror? I hit mirror and now this should work. If I now rotate the two arms, I should get exactly the same deformation, including the bugs. You see this one, for instance, it's kind of an interesting bug. I've successfully mirrored the weights. It would be a good idea to check if the boots are working, and you see the boots aren't working because in this case, the boots were already intersecting in the middle of the grid. Then the mirroring probably did not understand well what was going on, but that shouldn't really scare us too much. One thing that we can do is we can grab, say, one or two faces, and if I now hit the greater than key, like so, you see I'm expanding the selection, while the less than key gives me the shrinkage of the selection. That's really useful because now you see I can increase the selection there only to one side of the leg, and I can go isolate select, and now I can double check the skin weights in there and see if they make any sense. Indeed, I was missing some point in here, so I'm going to skin this thing. There you go, and that should sort it. I can probably try to mirror the weights again, so just to see what happens there. It's going to be very quick, and you see that indeed it didn't quite work. And you see the mirroring was actually breaking my skin weights. That sucks. Let's have a look. I'm going to grab this guy and again expand the selection, and I know this whole part is going to follow the left knee, right? So I can use another method. I can maybe convert the selection to vertices. So to convert a selection, you hold down Control, right mouse button, and now you have a new menu and you can convert the selection to whatever thing you want, in this case vertices. And then I go under Windows, General Editor, Component Editor, and in there you see I have a bunch of joints which are affecting this part, but that doesn't make any sense. You see how many? So I only need the knee L, select the column, disable the first row, I don't need it, and in here I can input 1, press enter, and the weights you see go to 0 on every other joint. These vertices are now following the knee L, so now the left knee is being followed. Let's have a look at the boot there. You see that there are some weights that got messed up probably when we mirror the weights. Usually the mirror skin weights, the default one from Maya, works okay. I never really had so many issues as this one, but we can quickly fix that as well. So I will go down to the ankle and I will make sure that the ankle is skinned to 1 in there. You see down there, there you go, these vertices, they were left behind. That's the problem with having many vertices very close to one another, or combined shapes as well. It's very easy to forget stuff or to miss stuff. So imagine that most of the work you will be doing from now on is tuning these kind of vertices, and it's easy to understand how problematic a simple line like this one going up on the side of the trousers can be. It's problematic not in itself, but in the fact that it forces you to spend maybe half an hour tweaking any part of the boot or the shape that has that problem. In terms of rigging, it adds to the work. So now I think I want to try mirroring the weights using the NGskin tools. You can find NGskin tools at NGskintools.com, not surprisingly. And NGskin tools is for free if you don't use it commercially. I always use the previous version of this tool. It is very useful for for some very selected tasks. So it has become a very important tool in my teaching workflow. So let's see how to mirror skin weights in NGskintools. I will open up the latest version. So the first thing you really need to do is to initialize skinning layers, and that gives you the list of all the joints. And in here you can see the mirroring option. This is a bit different in terms of philosophy because it asks you just a single axis. So this one is still X anyway. And the direction, guess from stroke, maybe we decide the direction, right? So from negative to positive. And then the closest point on surface is still a good setting to use, mirror, and let's see what happens there. In this case, you see that the mirror still works, didn't really break. There still are some issues you see with the geometry there. These vertices, these black vertices that are sticking out, they are sticking out because they are part of another mesh which is underneath this mesh. And that mesh which is underneath that mesh, we couldn't quite skin, remember? Because it's not visible, so we didn't have access to it, which is another issue of skinning multiple meshes which are on top of one another on which you have no control. You will see that there is quite a complex grid underneath there, and not all of it is visible geometry. There is a double layer geometry in there that needs to be accounted for. So I will have to select it, and I don't think it will be the last we will hear from this mesh, because I can see already that we will have to come back a few times before this is fixed. But this is because of the way the model was built, okay? In general, skinning is a lot faster if the model is built with skinning in mind. Actually, let's go into the component editor, and we're going to tell it this belongs to the right ankle, so the value of 1, load component, there you go. And now these weights should be sorted. I expect that as I rotate the thigh outside, I won't be seeing any vertex sticking out. On their other side, I still have problems. Well, let's see if NGskintools does the trick for us. So I'm going to load NGskintools, which takes a lot longer to load nowadays than it did in the previous version. And I'm going to mirror the skin weights. You see that works quite alright. There is a rogue vertex in there. I will just go into the component editor again. But this is small stuff. I mean, you can start your animation and then you can fix this thing as it becomes visible. So this is very, very little stuff. There you go. And now in theory, those vertices you see are fixed. And I guess I will have to go back to the T-pose. And again, with NGskintools, mirror. The mirroring still doesn't quite work there. I imagine there is some issue that will force us to manually go in there and tweak them. I will fix that little problem on the left foot a bit later. And you can tell that we already have problems down on the toe because of this double layer geometry. You see that we're going to have some troubles in there that we gotta fix. For the twisting of the ankle works quite nicely if you think of it. In fact, it works pretty well. Up there, see this line? What did I tell you at the beginning? We would have gotten problems because of this line. And indeed, we do. This kind of stuff, expensive stuff to skin. We will sort out this line later on. So now let's fix the thigh in there. So we'll start skinning, and the hip is moving a bit too many vertices. So I will go up there to the root, and I will start adding influence, maybe a bit more gently than I did in other parts. I'm more interested in having the vertices behave consistently than in having a nice deformation right now. I want them to behave the same way. I don't want any particular vertex to stretch more than others, because my intention is to relax the geometry at a later stage. It's more important for me to get consistent behavior than to get a wonderful deformation, because I don't think I can get a wonderful deformation even if I try in here. Not yet anyway. So let's go back and see how the transition works in there. So the transition is actually not too bad, but maybe I will, maybe I will just add a bit more influence to the root in there. Something like this. Ooh, that is not supposed to move. There you go. Now I want to see what happens if I use NGskintools to relax the skinning. I'm really curious. So I'm going to save before I do that, because there are some instances I've noticed, at least with the old NGskintools, when this traditional skinning tool of Maya is open, I've seen some instances of Maya failing to record the weights, and I don't really know if it's me or if it's NGskintools. I don't really know. I will open NGskintool once more. The previous version of NGskintools that I have opened on the right hand side had a proper relax tab that could do the job of relaxing the skin weights. The new one has something under set weights that is called smooth, which I suppose does the same job. Let's see what it does. By default, smooth will smooth all of your skinning. So if I click on smooth in there and I hit apply, you see that it's relaxing the weights quite a lot. If you select the limit to component selection, it's only going to smooth selected stuff. So in this case, if I select maybe just this area in here, I expect that that's the only area that is going to change. I hit apply and you see the calculation is quite fast. And you see that this way I can smooth the geometry quite a lot and get a much better deformation out of the box. Maybe instead of selecting such a small area, I can make the selection a little bit bigger, and I don't want to smooth the weights up there perhaps, and even down here. I don't know why these guys are selected. And now I'm going to smooth a little bit more. There you go, that looks okay. And you see that that gives me a much better deformation even in this area where I no longer have an intersection there. I have a puppet-like deformation. Given the geometry, I think that's probably one of the best solutions I can come up with. I mean, this is just my choice to make this guy deform like a puppet. You don't really have to go there. Maybe I would like this area to stay a bit more put. So I will go into the skin tool and gently I will add weight to the root, very, very gently to that area. So to lose as little volume as possible. So that should sort out the thigh. We still don't know what happens when we twist the thigh, but you see it works quite all right. Now, these areas in here where the line is all wavy and zigzaggy, well, they are problematic indeed. So we can grab these vertices, and again with NGskin tools under set weights, we can perform a smooth operation and see if that works any better. I don't think that is working particularly better. Well, there you go. If we increase the iterations quite a lot, but I'm very worried about the knee there, and the knee is losing a lot of volume when we bend the knee. So maybe I can go in there and very gently add, you see, a bit of influence to the knee, something like this. If there is a bit of intersection, I don't think it's going to be a massive issue. And then I'm going to go grab the hip part and again add a bit of influence so that we don't lose as much volume. You see, relaxing is kind of a cool tool, but it's very easy to lose volume if you don't pay attention. You want to make sure you lose volume where you want to lose volume, not everywhere. And then again, I go up a little bit just to make sure I don't lose as much volume. There you go, that should work. Now I have my skin weight in there. It seems to work alright. I have just a minimal amount of zigzag in there, and I have a decent deformation when I'm in the pose. That's quite alright. I think I want to delete this animation because I'm adding my own animation, my own calisthenics. But remember, we are under the influence of Advanced Skeleton. So I'm going to go back into Advanced Skeleton. I'm going to ask Advanced Skeleton to please remove body animation there. There you go. And then please give me a walk again, or a run, even better. Let's do a run. And now if you look at it, the skinning works quite all right. The deformation needs some love. Where? Here, where I told you we would get troubles, right? But that it was an unhappy choice to put the sleeve right on the bend of the elbow to begin with. So I was expecting that to happen. So in general, it feels like for body mechanics, the deformations are kind of sorted. Legs are working quite all right. Deformation are pretty graceful for the most part. I could maybe soften, could maybe smooth the weights a little bit more in this area. They still feel a bit clunky. So maybe I can just grab those vertices, maybe not that middle line, which we know we can't touch very easily because of the way it was modeled. And with NGskin tools again, I'm going to go in there and smooth. Oh, that's way too much. I mean, the result is quite good. That's definitely too much. There you go. Something like this will work a lot better. There you go. Look at that. That's not bad at all. That is actually quite good. It's a bit zigzaggy down here, but all in all, it's quite all right. It could have been much worse, I think. Consider that it didn't take us long to get there. You can really rig and skin up this character in an afternoon with Advanced Skeleton and with the right workflow for skinning. Now let's have a look at this sleeve that is giving us so much grief. Not that we didn't expect it, of course, but the pain is always felt the most when you're dealing with it, right? So this area here really needs some love. So I'm going to try first the hand grenade solution, which is just smoothing the skin weights and see how lucky we get with that. So I'm going to select, you see, all the skin weights we used to have, and then I'm going to smooth that area, and that gives me a bit more acceptable deformation. But you see, there's really no way we can get away with this bend. So let's go back to the T-pose, and we're gonna need some custom calisthenics in here. So I'm going to just rotate. I'm just going to bend the elbow this way. That's my custom calisthenics. If you think of it, the deformation isn't actually even that bad, that the bend is right there on the sleeve. So I will maybe try to add a bit of this weight to the shoulder so that it won't move as much. I'm going to try to be as gentle as I can. Ooh, it's saving. As gentle as I can. But you see that I'm already getting troubles down there. So maybe I'm going to start with this guy. So the problem is that I'm going to get some intersections. So something like this should give us a bit more leeway, I think. A solution for this problem could be to use corrective blend shapes, which could be the subject of another tutorial. But if you Google it, you will immediately understand why I think corrective blend shapes could be a solution to this problem. And maybe this upper part of the sleeve, I'm going to bind it a bit more to the elbow so that the elbow will move a bit of everything there, and the shoulder will move also a little bit of everything in there. And that's the hope anyway. We will lose a bit of volume, no doubt. You see, we already do, but we are trying to save the day. Usually you want to solve this thing in modeling and design. So now if I bend the elbow there, you see it looks kind of funky, but I have not lost all the hope. Now that I've done my very, very rude skinning, I can maybe try again and just smooth the skin weights and see what happens. I will maybe smooth them even more than I originally intended to. Maybe even here a little bit. Let's see what happens. So I'll need NGskin tool and I will just place this in position and I will just smooth it. Oh, sorry. I think I'm accidentally smoothing the whole thing. I would just want to limit to the selected components. I want to see what happens if 20 iterations. That's the result I get. Not very exciting. I'm going to smooth the geometry there a little bit. Maybe even those guys, I'm going to smooth them ever so slightly, but they don't care. And up here, it is actually better than I expected already, but maybe I want to regularize these edge loops, which look a bit messy. So I will select all the incriminated edge loops, convert the selection to vertices, and just apply the smooth in there. And that looks maybe a bit more promising. I also want to see if this tool supports edge selection. And it does, maybe with less iterations. I think maybe I can deselect this guy and see what happens there. No way. I might be having more luck with this guy. So if you don't see this part of the geometry, you might as well scale it down, if you see what I mean. And that is in the original model, or even just delete the faces. You know, there are so many things you could do. Because right now, you see, we are dealing with this, but we do not really need to deal with this because it's not even visible, but it becomes visible when we blend between two poses. So in here, either a corrective blend shape or just deleting the faces will make the work a lot easier. In this case, I will maybe see what happens if I skin those vertices to the elbow only, set to 1. You see that doesn't work too well. So I think this is something that I should have fixed in modeling really. So I'm going to select the forearm just like I did earlier on for the boot down there. I'm going to skin this thing manually once more. Please notice that most of the problems we are experiencing come from shapes which are within shapes. They're overlapping heavily. Maybe they're not even visible as we animate, but they are something you have to manage because when you animate them at a certain point they will pop open, they will pop visible. So I'm just going to add a little bit of weight to this shape so that it will deform with the shoulder rotation, something like this. And it's not great, but maybe it will do. And you see, it's already doing its job. It's not amazing, but it does its job. Now, if I look at the deformation there, I get to something that looks like some deformation. If you think of it, this solution gives me quite a good range of rotation, but there is just so much you can do with this design choice without adding new custom rig options, like maybe a corrective blend shape. Probably the corrective blend shape is the best thing I can think of right now. So we'll spend a couple of minutes getting a bit more range of rotation, even more. So just by adding the weight a little bit here to the elbow, I should be able, you see, to rotate even more. A 90 degrees corner is good enough for me. We are losing also some volume on the sleeve up there, so we will probably have to do some magic again, but maybe it will be enough to just skin, add a bit more weight in that area, and you see that still it's working, and the loss of volume is minimal there. I always mean it in the context. I mean, you have to see the shot anyway, but you see the problem here is mainly a design choice that needs to be reassessed. Let's have a look at the wrist twist. You see that the wrist twist is working quite alright, so it gives us very graceful deformations, quite good in fact, so that's good for us. Now let's have a look at the clavicle, and that's what the clavicle does. So the clavicle is a very interesting story to tell. We have to take care of it, of course. So I'm going to raise the clavicle quite a lot in there, because this way I can skin it. I'm going to grab this scapula joint, and you see in here the whole area is a bit roughly skinned. So maybe, as usual, I can just grab a bunch of vertices in there. This area seems to be okay. These guys could do with some smoothing, definitely. Maybe not these guys. And then again, with NGskin tools, I am going to smooth the skin weight, something like this. Should do. I want this to look okay, because eventually I will use these weights as a way to transfer the weights to the gilet. If I look at it, that gives me decent deformation, but you see, I kind of think that these areas should be more under the control of the chest. So I'm going to skin that to the chest. So very gently, I'm going to add the skin to the chest in there. I just don't like the fact that we gain so much volume when I raise the clavicle. That's a lot better, I think. Maybe this whole area can be a bit more under the control of the clavicle. That looks about fine. Now let's see what happens when the clavicle go under instead. You want to check both attributes and see in there still too much influence in the clavicle, because when we lower the clavicle, we create a bit of a hole in the armpit. I think lowering the clavicle this much is okay. This one is a bit too much even for 3D. So I think I'm pushing it too much, but I mean, you really need to push your rig, because the animators will push the rig. I mean, the first thing an animator will try to do is to break your rig. Not because they want to, of course. It's because they can't help it. There you go. Look at that. And now we should get a decent movement up for the clavicle. This one, where are you going? And then a decent movement down with a bit of intersection. But again, I mean, you can't win them all. So this should work just fine. The important thing is that this area here and this area here move more or less together. This area could be a bit smoother, so maybe I can reduce that weight a little bit, or rather I can maybe add a bit of influence in that area so that a bit more of the neck is affected by the clavicle. In here, this is going to be tricky, because I probably want a bit of this area to be affected, but that's going to involve two different pieces, actually 3 different pieces of geometry. So it's going to require a lot of maintenance from my side. It would be great to have a bit more influence up there. I'm a bit scared by the fact that I will have to manage those shapes. I will try anyway. You live only once, right? So in here, the problem is that in order to avoid this gap, you will have to have exactly the same topology on both shapes. You will have to fix the weight of these vertices, of the twin vertices, just the same way for both areas. But you see the topology is not there to support this action, so I'm going to keep the neck static instead. And that's because I don't really have the support of the geometry. I would be more than happy to have a bit more of a dynamic neck, but right now, as we are, I don't think I can afford it. I don't have the topology to support that, and I don't have the time to support that. So that's going to be my skinning for the upper part. We've fixed our clavicle area. Let's have a look at the twisting forward of the clavicle. That looks about okay-ish. We can do quite a lot of range of motion without breaking too much stuff. Up here, this is a bit awkward, see that? So maybe we can fix that. So I'm going to add a bit of influence in this area. These guys I can probably smooth a little bit, huh? So I'm going to, whoa. Can I smooth with half the intensity? Oh, that looks better. There you go, that looks a lot better. So maybe the intensity of my smooth was a bit too strong to begin with. Cool, now we have sorted out the chest plus arm relationship. We certainly want to delete the animation, zero out the calisthenics, and I think we need to have a look at the neck. The control of the neck is a bit small. We could have made it bigger with advanced skeleton. So I'm going to first rotate the neck backward, and the deformation is better than I expected, I have to say. A lot better, in fact. I'm quite impressed. I'm not impressed anymore. And then I want to see what happens when I twist it one way and the other way, and then we come back. And then I'm going to rotate the head a little bit on the way up, a little bit on the way down. There's just so much I will be able to rotate it anyway. Every time I do a rotation, I come back to the original T-pose, and then I will twist it a little bit. That's going to be the calisthenics for my neck. I'm going to have a look at this area in here. I suspect that I should be able to tweak these weights just by smoothing. Remember, I have to be very careful of this area because I don't have the topology to support the closure of that gap there, so I have to be very careful there. So I'm going to use the smooth operation here to get to a better skinning. That looks about fine, I think. I guess I will need to also select those edge loops and smooth them out as well. That seems to be working okay for the most part. So now I can rotate backward quite a lot. I mean, you are never going to rotate this thing that much probably, but hey, and I should be able to rotate forward quite a lot. This is a bit difficult to evaluate, so maybe as I go forward I can rotate the head up so that I see what's the deformation just for a second. So this is a good occasion to learn a new technique. Let's have a look at the concept of locking skin weights. An interesting tool you have while skinning is the ability to lock the weights by using these lock icons in here. With a script you can simply lock all the influences, and so let's say I go crazy and I now skin this part to the scapula. It seems like Maya is executing the command, but if I click out and in again, you see it didn't. And that's because all of the skin weights are locked. That is really useful because that means that I can go and select the various parts of the neck. Maybe I can unlock the first two joints of the neck. And now if I operate the smooth command in there, the smooth operation is only going to move vertices between the two parts of the neck, which is very handy because that means that whichever weight I remove from one side of the neck is going to be added to the other side, because the other side is the only available joint that can accept that skin weight. This is a very useful technique because it prevents you from skinning geometry to joints you're not really interested in touching. A really useful trick. I'm going to add a bit of influence there so that it moves a bit more gracefully. Down here, I'm going to need to fix this. You see this part is attached to the chest, so I have to reduce the influence on the chest and add it instead to the neck. There you go. This one is going to be mirrored, but I will fix it anyway. So that should give me a bit more leeway. You see that there is just so much I can do there as well. I can maybe go in there and see if the chest is having any influence, and I can just move that influence a little bit so that the deformation is going to be a bit more graceful there, and it certainly seems more graceful now. This is a pretty steep rotation anyway. So now I'm going to use the smooth because I know I have locked everything else. So the smooth is going to remove some influence somewhere. Since I have only a few joints free, you see the chest and the neck parts, I'm sure that I'm not going to mess up too much of the skinning that I had earlier on. And that sorts out the neck. Not bad, not bad at all. Now let's have a look at the other parts of the neck. So for instance, this part of the head, I think this is a bit too rough. I'm going to maybe lock the chest right now. I don't really need to have that influence on. And I'm going to go into neck part 2 and see what happens if I just move the weights a little bit. Not much going on. Oh, I see what's going on in there. So there is an intersecting geometry by default in there. So again, there is just so much I can do. I can maybe add a bit of influence here just so that that part of the hair will deform more or less the same way. That should give me a bit of a nicer deformation up there, and it does. Maybe this part should be following the first joint of the neck a bit closer. I think so. There you go. That looks a bit better. And then let's have a look at the head. The head is looking okay. It's doing its job. I can maybe just smooth that area a little bit so that the neck will stay a bit straighter when it bends over. And now I want to see what happens when I rotate the head alone. And in here, also it is true that normally when you raise the head this way, what happens is that the neck rotates that way. So you're never going to really just move the neck. So what I'm asking the rig to do is a bit unnatural. Now let's have a look at the twist. And the twist seems to be working quite alright, at least from the front view. But even from the back, you see the twist is pretty harmonious. So now the main body is sorted. We're missing the fingers, but everything else works alright. So I am going to save. And now I want to skin the gilet. I don't really know if that's the pronunciation. Maybe I have been butchering the pronunciation until now. Probably, possibly, almost certainly. So let's bring back the gilet and see where it is. So this is the gilet in here. It lost the shader in the meantime. You just need to reassign it to it. So I'm going to call this thing gilet, geo. I want to inherit the weights that took me a while to get on the rest of the body. I will grab the calisthenics I made so far for the head, and I will just save them out just in case I need them again. I don't want to ever do the calisthenics again. There you go. So this way they're stored. And now I can just delete the animation on those controllers. Let's ask Advanced Skeleton to give us a run again, and with a run you see that the G-lay stays behind. So let's see how to transfer the skin weights with NGskin tools. First of all, I want this geometry to be skinned to the same joints that I used for the rest of the geometry, so I will select the rest of the geometry. I have a little script in here that gives me the selection, all the joints that are affecting that geometry. Not all of them will be, of course, affecting every single vertex of the geometry, and I will select the new geometry of the gilet that I want to skin. In fact, probably I'm going to combine this into a single piece, including these guys. I'm going to combine everything that is gilet based into a single piece through a mesh combine operation. This is going to be my gilet gel. I'm going to delete the history. Now I'm going to select whichever joint was driving the original geometry. You will find the link to the script in the description of the video. I'm going to select the gilet and I'm going to skin it to the same joints. So now the same joints that are moving around the rig should be moving around the gilet as well, except they won't have the same deformation, you see, not at all. But that's not a problem for us because we have some aces up our sleeves. So I will call in NGskin tools to begin with, and I will select the gilet, initialize skinning layers, and then I will select first the geometry I want the skins from, and then the geometry I want to copy those skins on. Then I'm going to go under tools, and there's transfer layers, and from body to gilet gel, closest point on surface is really the only thing we can use because they don't share the same UV space, they don't share the same vertex ID, and let's see if that works. The transfer should have happened, and you see that now the gilet and the lower part work more or less the same way. So that's sort of cool, it works sort of okay. Let's check the chest rotation. There you go, you see they move together, not bad at all. That's why I wanted to first fix the base geometry and then fix the rest. Okay, because this way we fixed the geometry that was very simple to fix, and then we transfer that weight onto something that is fairly complex. And I can do exactly the same thing for those buttons there. I didn't do them but I think I could do that. Now let's check this swinger, and you see that the swinger works quite okay indeed. Not bad at all if you think that we didn't really spend much time doing it. Now there are some tweaks that need to be done, and now we need to have the belt fixed. So the belt has again some issues because right now this belt can't really deform, can it? There are a few solutions to make sure this part does not deform, but still you will have to do some creative rigging in there, and I don't think we have the time to do that right now. So I'm just going to select the whole belt in there. I'm going to combine the geometry, delete the history, call this belt underscore gel, and then again select the gilet this time around, select the joints which are controlling the gilet, select the new geometry, skin the new geometry to the same joints, and then grab the new geometry, initialize skinning layers, go first, grab the gilet, then go grab the belt, and then go transfer layers using closest point on surface as an algorithm. Now, if I am not mistaken, that should give me the same deformations. You see, the problem here is this is not meant to deform, so it's working quite okay up there, but really it is not meant to deform. So this would require a bit more of a bespoke rigging solution in my opinion. So maybe the buckle could be skinned to this joint here about this guy, that joint being maybe spine 1 part 1M. So I'm going to select all the vertices of this buckle, and I guess the whole part really will need to be selected. I'm just going to expand the selection, you see. And then using the component editor, I can just go find spine 1 part 1 and just input 1 there, press enter. So now it shouldn't deform as much anymore when I rotate the chest. In fact, it shouldn't move at all when I rotate the chest, you see. That gives me some leeway before I actually intersect. I think I will need another control. It would be good to put a joint in here and a control so that I can move the buckle and the upper part of the belt. Now that I've done this, you see that the buckle doesn't deform anymore, and I still have a certain amount of freedom with the rotation of the chest. The ideal solution here would really be to put a joint in here where the buckle is and just skin that to the joint, add a control, and make the control maybe follow the chest 1-to-1. So that would probably be the best of both worlds. But all in all, this is also sorted as a problem. These vertices, they need to be skinned to the same joint probably. So these guys need to follow the belly. So I'm going to first of all combine them, delete the history, call them, I don't know, thread gel maybe, and then I'm going to select the belly, the joints which drive the belly, the thread, add them to a skin cluster, and then I'm going to go into NGskin tools as usual, you know the drill, and on the thread I'm going to initialize the skin layers, then select the belly, the thread, and go tools, transfer layers, and just transfer these guys. So now when I operate the swinger, you see they move one to one, they deform exactly the same way, they work pretty nicely. In fact, we are just missing the buttons, so I guess there are many ways to attach buttons, but I'm going to use the skin solution again. So grab these skin joints, grab these guys, attach them to the skin joints. Oh, these guys have history, so maybe I can go grab them and delete the non-deformer history on them, and then initialize the skinning layer, and first the source, then the destination, and I'm going to go transfer layers, again transfer, then source, destination again, and then transfer layer and transfer. So that will give me again pretty good skin there. See, now let's have a look at the legs, because remember that the feet were rolling in a funky way when we tested it at the beginning. I want to see if the roll is now fixed, and you see the roll works pretty well. We have some geometry crashing there, and that's of course because of overlapping geometry. I want to see the roll forward and the roll angle. I want to see if the roll works well, and it works pretty well. So I just need to tweak the skinning down there. I think for the fingers I will probably need to skin them because you see they're all over the place, but I think we are in a good position. I mean, there are some tweaks to be done here and there. We need to soften up and smooth maybe a bit of these, and maybe the armpit needs to be following the chest a little bit more, but all in all I think we are in a good spot. Let's see what happens when I raise the arm in there. That part definitely needs some love, so I can spend a few minutes tweaking that. So I will go in there, and first of all maybe I can make that follow the scapula. Nope, not the scapula. Maybe I can make this part follow the scapula a little bit more, and maybe I can grab the shoulder, not these vertices, a bit more to the influence of the shoulder, which makes me think that perhaps instead of wasting time manually doing this, I can just grab these 3 guys, actually 4, and just convert the selection to vertices. Maybe, you know, maybe even these guys. Convert the selection to vertices, and again using NGskin tools, go smooth these guys until I get to a good result there. Maybe I was a bit extreme in my smoothing. I think I want to do one more and then deselect these guys and then smooth only these guys, and then again deselect, smooth, and that gives me a much nicer solution. Please notice that in real life you can't raise the arm like this without raising the clavicle, so the actual pose will be clavicle up and arm up this way. That's the actual pose. That works pretty nicely. I mean, down here of course I would like the chest to drive those vertices a bit more, but we are looking at up there. So this hopefully helps explain how to solve those itchy issues that we had earlier on. So now we're going to transfer the old facial weights from the old skins that David made to this new one as a last touch to the rig. On the right hand side I have the original character, the one that was already skinned by David, and that character had the face that sort of worked already, so I want to use that face, and I want to use that skinning information to drive the new character, which as you can see is not skinned on the face, but I only need that part of the skinning. This is a good case scenario to learn how to transfer only partial weights. First of all, on the original one I want to make sure I have layers enabled in the NGskin tools so the information is stored on the layer. Then I'm going to go under File, Export Layer to JSON, and I'm going to save this weight as a JSON file. This means that now there is an external file that contains the skinning information. On the left hand side, the new rig I have, I'm going to select the geometry. There is already, you see, a layer there. I'm going to go under File, and I'm going to import that skinning information that I just exported earlier on. As I do so, I am prompted with the same window that was asking for the mapping mode. Remember, closest point on surface is the only thing we can do because the UV space is different, the vertex index is different. I just want to make sure that I'm keeping the existing layers on the destination, and in a second it will be clear why. I hit transfer, and now I should get, you see, 2 layers. The new layer, which is the one we had on the original character, and the old layer. If I am not mistaken, however, I expect the body to work like the old character, So if I raise the arm, you see I have a problem with the armpit there. And if I raise the arm in the original, I have exactly the same problem. So the skinning for the body is exactly the same as it was originally. But since I have layers enabled, that means that I still have my skinning on the original base layer. In fact, if I disable it and I lift the arm up there, you will see that I get the deformation I wanted, my deformation, not the old one. So it would be great if we could somehow mix these two layers without losing data. The other thing that I expect to happen is that the face won't work, or rather, let's say if you have never done this before, you will expect the face to work. I can tell you the face won't work. So if I grab the face controller in there, you see that the rig works, but the skinning does not work. And if I go on the original one, the skinning was working. So how come I have the same exact layer there, but I don't have the face deformation? The explanation is that we never quite skinned the face to these joints. Remember that we skinned all the face vertices to the head joint, not really to the joints of the face. So it was this joint that was carrying along the whole front part of the face. So in the list of influences that are driving this skin, you will not find the facial joints. That's why even if you import the right weights, it won't work. Simply speaking, these joints are not part of the skin cluster that moves this face. They are not listed as an influence. In fact, if I go and grab any vertex up there on the face and I go into the component editor for it, you will find that it's just connected to head and neck, nothing else. We have to include those small joints that we find around into the skinning cluster. How do we do it? Well, it's rather easy. We just go grab the head on this guy, and then we execute a little bit of a script that I found around that once you execute it, it finds the skin cluster and it selects whichever joint is moving that geometry. And you see, not all of them are selected, although most of them are. If I execute the same script, and you will find a link to the script in the description anyway, if I execute the same script on the new rig, you will find that I will have less joints selected. I expect I won't have any for the face. I will first of all save this selection set. In the original rig, I will use pose to shelf or any other way you have to save a selection set, and then I will store it on the shelf, grab the command. This is the command that I'm going to execute. You see, that's the command. And then I'm going to go into the new rig and execute that very command. If I input that mel command in here and execute it by pressing numeric pad enter on the right hand side of the keyboard, you see that I get the selection, but I also get the facial joints. So let's try and see if it works. So now we need to tell Maya, please add those facial joints to the face. We go under rigging, skin, and there's something called edit influence at the bottom. Through the edit influence menu, you can add new joints and tell the geometry, look, follow those joints as well. Even if with an influence of 0, okay, even if they are not, those joints are not really affecting the geometry, but it's important that we have those joints in the list so that when we import the skin weights will attach to the correct joint. So let's add those influences. First of all, I'm going to select the geometry which I'm going to work on, and I'm going to remove temporarily the new layer that I imported. For now, I don't really need it. It was just there for testing. And then for double safety, I'm going to go under tools and delete all custom nodes. That gets rid of all the nodes that NGskintools made on the geometry, but it keeps the weight. So if I now grab a control, you see that I still get the same deformation I had earlier on. So exactly the same deformation. And the same should go for any other control. So now I have a clean geometry with the skin weights I need. If I'm unsure about what I'm doing, I can always export the weights before performing the operation. As a form of backup, I could initialize the skin layer, go File, Export Layer. I can call this thing my weights 000 or 001, whichever, it doesn't really matter. And then I can delete the custom nodes. So now I have a backup somewhere. If anything goes wrong, I have a backup plan. And it's always good to have a backup plan. Remember, the ability to go back and forth between versions is so important. So now I'm going to paste the command that selects all the joints. I have the geometry selected as well, and I'm going to tell Maya, please add those joints to the skin cluster. I'm going to under skin, edit influences, and options of add influence. In there, I'm going to first reset the settings, and then I'm going to disable use geometry. I don't really need to use any geometry as an influence, and I'm going to click on apply. Now, Maya is going to go through every single joint and add them to the list of joints that are affecting the geometry. Now, if I grab any control, I would expect the deformation to work exactly the same way, and you see it seems to work like it did earlier on. It doesn't seem like anything has changed in there. I'm going to check the leg as well, and you see nothing really has changed. If you're not sure, however, let's say that you suspect something has changed, you can go back into NGskintools, initialize the skinning layer, and just import the layer again. So I can import my weights, and this time I can use vertex ID because it's the same exact geometry. The vertex ID means that every vertex has a number, and this means that Maya will methodically cycle through each vertex ID and assign the correct weight to each vertex ID. I don't really need to keep the existing layer, although it does it anyway. So now I have my layer in there. I expect I will get exactly the same deformation. There you go. See that? Same deformations. This is a good way to preserve your weights if you're unsure. You just export them as a backup and you import them back whenever you need them. It's time for us to get down to business. So these two layers I can just merge because they're the same good layer that we had earlier on. Anyway, you always want to have a look at the deformation to see that it's the deformation you want. Swinging the hip might be a good way to do the check as well. See that? It works. And then we go select the geometry once more, go File, Import Layer from JSON. This time around we import again the old layers, the original pirate skin, and we are going to use closest point on surface, and we are going to keep the existing layers. And if I am not mistaken now, the face should work, because remember we told Maya that we wanted to use those joints. So now the facial skinning that David made before sending this file to me, I would need to tweak the skin on the bandana, but I think that's something that we don't need to do in this tutorial. You get the picture anyway. And now you see that everything works just the way I want it on the face. Well, just on the face, because the body, however, you will see, is still using the old weights. It doesn't work. So how do we keep only the facial skin and not the body? Well, on the new layer you see there's a mask section. If I am not mistaken, I expect that the mask will help us only keep one part of the layer and just ignore the other. That makes some sense, I think. So I'm going to make the GUI of NGskintools a bit bigger, go on to mask and click on paint down here so that now I am painting stuff. I want to flood the mask with a value of 0. So now if I'm not mistaken, when I will move a control in there, I will get back to the old deformations. You see, the layer is there, but since the mask is flooded to 0, nothing is being used from the new layer. It's all muted. Now I'm going to paint again, and this time I'm going to go up there, and this time as an operation I'm going to add to begin with, and then I'm going to maybe have the brush a little bit bigger, something like this, and I'm going to paint the mask on the face so that this part of the face will be using the old skin weights that were working that David made, and everything else will be using the new ones. There you go, something like this, I guess. I should be able to mirror the mask as well. I will look at it from the bottom just to see if it does work. The axis is X from negative to positive, so direction from negative to positive. Let's see what happens if I mirror. And you see it's mirroring the mask, so I don't even need to paint the mask on both sides. I don't need the mask down here though. Here at the back, that stuff is not needed. If I am not mistaken, what will happen now is that the face controllers will move the face, alright? You see? So I'm using the old skin weights to control the face rig, and I'm using the new one for controlling the body. So the best of both worlds. Now you know that it's very hard to lose skin weights because you always have a way to transfer, mask, import, export. So there's always a backup plan available. The one last thing that I maybe want to fix is the jaw. You see the jaw right now is a bit of a mix of two worlds. Not looking really good. So I'm going to just open up the jaw quite a lot in there, maybe even translate it a little bit. The most I can open it, let's say, and then I'm going to skin it. These two layers I now don't need anymore, right? I can just merge down and now I have a single layer there, and I can go and skin the jaw a little bit better. I'm going to go grab the jaw joint and I'm going to start adding influences in there. This jaw is going to be very difficult to skin in my opinion because it's so big. There's only so much you can open it without doing a lot of work. The problem here is that if you add too much influence to the jaw, it's going to go into the neck heavily, and if you add too little, it's going to deform a lot. Essentially, you have to take an artistic direction to begin with before even being technical about it. You have to decide, do I want to see this line of the jaw into the neck, or I want the jaw to be deformed by the neck? So in general, it's a good idea to look at it from an artistic point of view in here and decide what's the deformation you want to have. In the meantime, I did unlock all the weights, and now I'm going to add a little bit of influence on the neck, and I'm going to play a little bit with these two joints until I get to a result that is somewhat satisfying. I think I can just grab all the vertices now and I can try again relaxing using NGskin tools. So all these guys in there, maybe even And these guys, I don't need the very low base of the neck. Something like this will probably work. Yeah, I think that could work. And then with NGskintools, we're going to try and apply a smooth. And you see, there's something also going on with NGskintools in here. Because you see I smooth the weights, but then when I hit undo, it doesn't undo the way I expect, so it does this. It might be because these joints are not part of the hierarchy, might be, but this is a bit unexpected. Certainly it's annoying that the undo doesn't work in this case, really annoying in fact. And I just finished making it work and now I'm having to make it work again. In practice, since in this case we lost the ability to undo for this particular operation and I don't know why, that means I can't use the smooth operation. It's not a given that it won't work for all the characters. It's just in this particular conformation I see that the joints are floating about without a hierarchy. This might be enough for NGskintools not to like it, but the only way to know is to try it, so don't start from the assumption that it won't work. Now let's have a look. I must admit, I am growing increasingly suspicious of this problem with the NGskintools because so far they always behaved very well with me, and on this demo there were a few glitches when mirroring and there were a few glitches when relaxing. So just to play on the safe side, I'm going to reopen the old version of NGskintools, which I keep with me because I don't quite like the speed at which the new one works for me, and I want to see if the old one works better. So here's the old window. You see that there is a relax tab in there. I'm going to grab the vertices that I want to relax just as a test, and I'm going to relax them. And sure enough, that works. So it seems to me the new version has some issues. Look at this, now it works out of the box. Look at that, amazing. There's nothing like an event like this one to demonstrate why companies do not roll out the newest version of the software as soon as it comes out. That's because we do not know for a fact if everything works the way it did earlier on. A lot of the time a new version breaks features that used to be working, and maybe this bug is not known to the developer the moment they roll out a new version. So in this case I think I would rather stay with the old version of NGskintools when I am relaxing the face, for instance. You can still grab the old NGskintools from the website, and I much prefer to work with the old one still. I don't know why, I just feel it works better, but I don't know why. And now I can open the face quite a lot, you see, and the jaw loses some volume, but at the same time I keep the idea of a jaw being there. This area here will need some smoothing in the skinning, there you go. But nothing really beats a drawing, because with a drawing you can decide, okay, I'm going to achieve that effect with a corrective blend shape, or I'm going to achieve that very effect with skinning. But without that, you don't quite know what you're up against. So there you go. So that works. We now have the jaw that opens up harmoniously. Well, as much as we can, of course. There you go. Nice. Probably should also translate a bit forward when it opens. Something like this. And I can open the mouth quite a lot in there. So now I'm left with having to mirror these influences. And it's a bit of a problem in my opinion. Let me save before I do anything. And also, whenever we mirror the weights, we are mirroring the weights for the whole body, which is a bit overkill if you think of it. So I'm going to save and try a mirror operation, and if that fails I'm going to try something else. So in NGskintools I reinitialize the skinning layers. You see I keep closing and opening the skinning layers because sometimes I don't want them to have to be around, sometimes I really need them, I can't work without them. And then I'm going to go under mirror X, negative to positive, and well, fingers crossed, mirror. Now this is going to be very interesting because I suspect this will fail. Now let's have a look and see what happens with the arms. So the arms seems to be okay. The legs seems to be okay. That's good. That's good. The swinger seems to be okay. The big time, will the jaw work? And the jaw did not work. You see the mirroring failed. This new version of NGskintools might have some issues that I don't know about. So I am going to try mirroring the weights using the old version of NGskintools. So I'm going to make sure that the new NGskintools has no node left. So I delete all custom nodes in there just for safety. And then I'm going to select my geometry, go back to the T-pose, call in the old NGskintools and initialize the skinning layers there. So with the old NGskintools open, I'm going to go under mirror, so negative to positive, mirror weights, mirror mask, closest point on surface, the mirror axis is X, that works for me, mirror weights, and let's have a look, and sure enough, now the mirroring works. What changed apart from the version of the plugin? This is a very interesting topic because the tendency you have at the beginning is to go for the newest machine, for the newest software. But that doesn't mean the newest software will work better than the old one. The industry waits before changing software because they do not know when a new software comes out what works and what's broken. So now I finally have symmetry on the face and I think I am done. Or rather, now that we have learned all the techniques and we have a rig that more or less works, I've made my own calisthenics. This kind of rig can already go to animation so that they can tell us what else is needed. And in the meantime, as riggers, we can keep working on it. So now I will just re-evaluate the skinning and refine it a little bit before I call it a day. So I'm checking the foot roll in here and you see that the double geometry there is causing some issues. Again, select all the vertices here and all of these guys and even this guy here, and in the component editor I'm going to skin them to 1 to the ankle R. So now they will move 1 to 1 with the ankle R. The deformation will be a lot more harmonious. I will just have to drag all these vertices and skin them to the ankle, and then I will have to smooth the weights. So I will just skin them to 1, and now I should get a better deformation there. If I press 3, it should work. There you go, and now it works. Up here, similar issue. Well, this pose is really extreme. You wouldn't really quite be able to do a pose like this one in real life. So it's kind of normal that it gives you problems. Now that we know that the relax works well with the old NGskin weight tools, we can just go crazy and then grab these vertices, the old NGskin tools, and relax the weights. The double thickness in the geometry doesn't really help. This kind of stuff for which there is a level of geometry inside and one that's just creating problems with skinning. So you're going to spend a lot of time skinning something like this, and in general you just wouldn't, because it's just a waste of energy and time. So maybe I can go in the middle here and all these vertices, just skin them to the knee. There you go, something like this. And now I have a very, you see, very harsh change of geometry there, which I'm not too worried about because I'm just going to try and smooth it. You see, by relaxing it, you get more than decent deformations. Maybe I don't want to relax this area too much. There you go. And now that gives me a lot better deformation. I will need to check what happens once smooth, and it looks okay now. Nice. That was quick, although not painless, not at all in fact. So now everything works just fine down there for the buttons geometry. So this whole lower part and the buttons here on the side, I will combine them together. I will delete the history, and once I'm happy with the skinning down here, I'm going to just transfer it over. So the knee deformation looks actually quite alright. The problem, as anticipated, is this area, which is a bit sharp as a turn. The first go-to solution for me not having time is to do a relax. So I will grab the middle edge in there, and then I will just expand the selection. I will go to the pose I have in the calisthenics there, and I will try and see what happens if I relax that selection. That's looking okay. Maybe I can expand the selection even a bit more and relax it a little bit more. Expand and relax, and that gives me a nicer deformation. There you go. That's kind of good. As I mentioned at the beginning, this line is always going to give us some sort of issues, but right now you see it's managed properly, I think. Nice. The thigh on the way back in this pose is deforming very gracefully on the front. On the way up, however, I kind of feel like this area could be still skinned a bit more to the root. Let's skin it to the root. So let's try and see if we can get less deformation in the root area here when the legs are moving. Something like that. And then again I will go back to the T-pose, grab the middle edge loop. I think I need to convert it to vertices because in the old version of NGskin tools it seems like if I don't have the vertices selected, I get to deform the whole thing, not just the vertices. So I will select the vertices, and in fact you see this line sure enough is problematic, you see. So I will make the selection a bit bigger there, and I will smooth it. There you go, a little bit better. And you see that now there is no bump anymore at the bottom of the buttocks when the thigh rolls up. You see up here, maybe this area, I could skin it a little bit more to the root. I will be very gentle, but I will definitely add some weight to the root in that area. And then these crease that I have in here, I can maybe reduce a little bit of that by adding it to the thigh, but it's a battle that is going to be hard to win, I think. But I will just add it a little bit to the thigh there, and then, but maybe using a smaller brush. I'm only touching the crease there, and I reduce a little bit of the crease sticking out. That looks about okay. I can maybe use a smooth operation to regularize that area a little bit, and then again, it looks about fine. If there had been no hard modeled crease in there, we might have been done already with this area. We wouldn't be spending the time in here. It seems to be okay. And in here maybe I can add a little bit of weight to the root, very gently, just to prevent a bit of the deformation from happening. Again, the solution to this problem is not skinning, but it's designing. You really want to first draw the deformation that you would like to obtain, and then and only then you skin it, because otherwise you're delegating the technical artist the task of designing your crease, but the technical artist is already busy fixing, guess what? Technical issues. So you don't really want to add on top of their work. So there you go. Now I have a very good deformation on the way up. See that? Let me just move it. There you go. In fact, fairly good deformation, I'd say, considering that I went for a very low thigh in there on the way to the back. The deformation is also very good. Also consider that when a leg goes this much to the back, the hip is winging to the back as well. So you will have much less deformation there. To the side, also very good deformation there. You see, very controlled. So all in all, the leg is sorted, the thigh area is sorted. So now that the skinning works on the leg and on the thigh area, that works pretty well. I think it's a good time to mirror it and see if the mirror works in the old version of NGskintools. I have no reason to believe it won't. So we'll go back to the T-pose, call in the old NGskintools, initialize the skinning layers, save, and go mirror -X to +X, mirror weights, mirror mask, mirror axis X, closest point on surface, mirror weights. That's done. Let's see if we get... You see, we don't get the same problem we used to get earlier on when this foot would be moving. It seems to me it was the new NGskintools that was creating the problem. I'm going to grab these parts that I combined earlier on. Remember, the history is deleted. I'm going to first of all select whichever joint is controlling the geometry overall, then add the additional parts to the selection, and then go skin, bind skin. Then I'm going to select the original geometry, the one that I skinned, the new one, the one which isn't skinned, and I'm going to go under Tools, Transfer Weights. And this window pops open, and in here you see the association of joint to joint. Every joint is found, it seems. So I'm going to use closest point and apply. And now you see that they deform like the geometry which is hosting them, which is pretty neat. Less work for us. The clavicle, pretty problematic still in my opinion. And see what I meant earlier on about deformations and different topology there. So I'm going to hide whichever is not the core body. And I'm going to tweak the skin in here. I'm going to just skin this area a bit more to the chest, so that there will be much less deformation when the clavicle goes up. And the same goes for this area down here. When skinning, I much prefer to look at these in low poly, because that gives me a much more precise idea of how things deform. Maybe I can try the smooth operation here, and it seems to be fairly successful as an operation. Up here, I will have to be very delicate when adding influence to the chest, because I still want the clavicle to be affecting that area. Also, I will keep an eye on these edge loops. I want them to move more or less together. And you see the creases, again, are giving us issues again. So now when the clavicle lifts up, you see we don't have so much volume being generating under the armpit. And when it goes down, you see that we do have intersection, but we don't create a hole under the armpit. Also, remember, we have a very powerful tool in our hands, that tool being the relax from NGskintools, from the old version of NGskintools, I should say. So I'm going to reduce the number of steps. Ooh, that's too many. Ooh, it doesn't always undo. The relaxing doesn't always undo. That's something that is worth keeping in mind, I think. There is really a fine line in here between working and not working. And again, this scapula plus shoulder connection, it's often a connection where corrective blend shapes are employed. And right now it seems to work when we raise the clavicle. Let's see when we go. There you go. So we fixed all the body in there. Everything works just nicely, nice and clean. Now we save before it's too late. And we go and check the body parts that we've just hidden. Remember that we have a bunch of body parts that they are supposed to deform with the body. Right now we change the body, so we need to change them as well. Initialize the skinning layers for those. And then I will select first the geometry I fixed, then the geometry I want to fix, and I'm going to just transfer the skin weights. Transfer layers, there you go. And I'm going to keep existing layers, you never know, you might need it. And now the G layer, you see, deforms like the underneath geometry. It's a bit harsh, so I can maybe risk it and run a general relaxation, a very low one on the G layer. There you go, look at that. That looks pretty nice to me. This area in here, the deformation on the button depends on the skinning underneath. So you either attach the button using a rivet maybe there, or a hair follicle, or you just skin the chest so that it doesn't deform much in that area. Down here, this just needs skinning, because if you think of it, there was no supporting geometry in this area. So I will start by grabbing all these vertices, which are the offending vertices, all of these guys, which I don't really like the way they move. These guys are the neat. go into the component editor, and I don't really need them to follow, say, the scapula, I think. And I don't really need them to follow the shoulder parts. I will input 0 down here. I know I'm scaling down influence, but if you scale it down in the component editor, it's only going to be redistributed amongst the joints that are visible in the component editor. So we should be okay. So I will input 0 here. Doesn't like it. Try again. That's gone. I input 0 center. That goes. All of these shoulder bits, I don't really need them to influence that part. So if you select a column and remove the first line and just input 0, the weights will be set to 0 for that part. So now this is only being affected by the right joints. And you see that it's already working a lot better. In fact, it doesn't move with the scapula anymore, stays put. Well, it moves a little bit, but it stays put. This area down here, this vertex that moves down here, this one is mistaken. This one should not be following the scapula, should it? So it's following the shoulder part 1 and shoulder R. We don't need that. And sure enough, you see now that works. So the gilet now works. Now let's bring back the belt. We initialize the skin weights on the belt, the layers, and then we select first the gilet, then the belt. The gilet now has been fixed, so we can just transfer the layers, keep the existing layers just for safety, transfer the weights, and see how the belt works. And you see it deforms nicely for as long as we don't push it too much. The truth is, this belt would need a set of joints around the belt, and it should be skinned to those joints, and then those joints should be following the middle of the spine. That's how this should work. And this is a skinning tutorial, so I'm not going to go that deep into it. Adding those joints will make this a very long tutorial and also not a skinning tutorial anymore. This part in here, the central part of the belt, the buckle and the central part, this part really needs to be skinned to a particular joint like we did at the beginning. So I'm going to go into the component editor. I think it was spine part 1, set it to 1, and now it moves 1 to 1 with the belly. Again, the real solution for this buckle is another joint. I can maybe try to relax the vertices of the belt in here, but I don't think I will get a great result. Let's see. Delete all custom nodes that will keep the skinning but will remove all the layers. I will initialize the skinning layers again only for the belt. I will try smoothing them. You see that works. So that gives me a bit of a nicer deformation. Having a gap for the geometry here essentially forces us to skin it exactly the same way as the buckle. So I can maybe flood these vertices using NGskintools. And the joint was spine 1M. So I'm going to replace with the intensity of 1 the weight. There you go. And now you see they connect. And these guys in the middle here, you can only relax them and hope for the best. So I can relax them ever so slightly so that they don't deform too badly. And that should give it, you see, a decent deformation, which we are going to need to mirror anyway. So that sorts it. We fixed the whole body now. So the whole body works kind of alright, gives us a good range of motion. Again, you see, this is the reason why you need the buckle to have its own joint, its own controller, because you want to be able to move this belt independently from the body, because otherwise the body will be just very limited in the range of motion. You really need another set of joints around this belt, I think. The whole face really works for as long as the head is stable, but then it doesn't quite follow the face itself. But then the geometry sort of melts as the face rotates. There was a problem also in the original rig. I checked the original rig that David sent me and it had exactly the same issue. So I think in here it may be worth reskinning the whole thing. So let's do it. I want to make sure there are no custom nodes from NGskintools in the scene. So I keep the weight, but there is no custom node from NGskintools. The reason why I do that is because remember, NGskintools, the new version, has troubles relaxing the face, so I can't use that to relax the face. So in here I will try a bit of a brutal approach. I will just skin the joints in a very harsh way without too much fall off, and then I will just smooth the weights using NGskintools and pray for the best. This is difficult going because all these joints have no hierarchy, so they're hard to pick. So this guy here, check joint R, I will just add a lot of weight to it as much as I can. In fact, I will just go fairly heavy on him. There you go. This guy in here will be pretty heavy as well. Eyebrow inner, this guy. And I will go like this for every joint that is on the right hand side. This is the most time consuming bit of the rig in my opinion, because there are plenty of joints in there. I will do only the right joints, of course. You see how they move, because earlier on this influence was reserved to the head. For whichever reason, I'm going to fast forward a lot of these operations because they're just repeating over and over. This skinning here you can only do in practice by testing it, and then once you do the calisthenics for the face, you will know if you're doing it right, because its result depends heavily on the rig. So every rig is different. We need to test it in the context of the rig. Nostril joint. This joint is in an odd placement for something which is being called the nostril joint. The eyelid, you definitely need to go a bit more out, I think. This is the upper lid base joint, so this whole... There you go. So we fixed all the body in there. Everything works just nicely, nice and clean. Now we save before it's too late, and we go and check the body parts that we've just hidden. Remember that we have a bunch of body parts that they are supposed to deform with the body. Right now we change the body, so we need to change them as well. Initialize the skinning layers for those, and then I will select first the geometry I fixed, then the geometry I want to fix, and I'm going to just transfer the skin weights. Transfer layers, there you go. And I'm going to keep existing layers, you never know, you might need it. And now the gilet, you see, deforms like the underneath geometry. It's a bit harsh, so I can maybe risk it and run a general relaxation, a very low one on the gilet. There you go, look at that. That looks pretty nice to me. This area in here, the deformation on the button depends on the skinning underneath. So you either attach the button using a rivet maybe there, or a hair follicle, or you just skin the chest so that it doesn't deform much in that area. Down here, this just needs skinning because if you think of it, there was no supporting geometry in this area. So I will start by grabbing all these vertices, which are the offending vertices, all of these guys, which I don't really like the way they move. These guys are neat. Go into the component editor, and I don't really need them to follow, say, the scapula, I think. And I don't really need them to follow the shoulder parts. I will input 0 down here. I know I'm scaling down influence, but if you scale it down in the component editor, it's only going to be redistributed amongst the joints that are visible in the component editor. So we should be okay. So we'll input 0 here. Doesn't like it. Try again. That's gone. I input 0% there. That goes. All of these shoulder bits, I don't really need them to influence that part. So if you select a column and remove the first line and just input 0, the weights will be set to 0 for that part. So now this is only being affected by the right joints. And you see that it's already working a lot better. In fact, it doesn't move with the scapula anymore, stays put. It moves a little bit, but it stays put. This area down here, this vertex that moves down here, this one is mistaken. This one should not be following the scapula, should it? So it's following the shoulder part 1 and shoulder R. We don't need that. And sure enough, you see now that works. So the gilet now works. Now let's bring back the belt. We initialize the skin weights on the belt, the layers, and then we select first the gilet, then the belt. The gilet now has been fixed, so we can just transfer the layers, keep the existing layers just for safety, transfer the weights, and see how the belt works. And you see it deforms nicely for as long as we don't push it too much. The truth is, this belt would need a set of joints around the belt, and it should be skinned to those joints, and then those joints should be following the middle of the spine. That's how this should work. And this is a skinning tutorial, so I'm not going to go that deep into it. Adding those joints will make this a very long tutorial and also not a skinning tutorial anymore. This part in here, the central part of the belt, the buckle and the central part, this part really needs to be skinned to a particular joint like we did at the beginning. So I'm going to go into the component editor. I think it was spine part 1, set it to 1, and now it moves 1 to 1 with the belly. Again, the real solution for this buckle is another joint. I can maybe try to relax the vertices of the belt in here, but I don't think I will get a great result. Let's see. Delete all custom nodes that will keep the skinning but will remove all the layers. I will initialize the skinning layers again only for the belt. I will try smoothing them. You see that works. So that gives me a bit of a nicer deformation. Having a gap for the geometry here essentially forces us to skin it exactly the same way as the buckle. So I can maybe flood these vertices using NGskin tools. And the joint was spine 1M. So I'm going to replace with an intensity of 1 the weight. There you go. And now you see they connect. And these guys in the middle here, you can only relax them and hope for the best. So I can relax them ever so slightly so that they don't deform too badly. And that should give it, you see, a decent deformation, which we are going to need to mirror anyway. So that sorts it. We fixed the whole body now. So the whole body works kind of alright, gives us a good range of motion. Again, you see, this is the reason why you need the buckle to have its own joint, its own controller, because you want to be able to move this belt independently from the body because otherwise the body will be just very limited in the range of motion. You really need another set of joints around this belt, I think. The whole face really works for as long as the head is stable, but then it doesn't quite follow the face itself. But then the geometry sort of melts as the face rotates. There was a problem also in the original rig. I checked the original rig that David sent me and it had exactly the same issue. So I think in here it may be worth reskinning the whole thing. So let's do it. I want to make sure there are no custom nodes from NGskintools in the scene. So I keep the weight, but there is no custom node from NGskintools. The reason why I do that is because remember, NGskintools, the new version, has troubles relaxing the face, so I can't use that to relax the face. So in here I will try a bit of a brutal approach. I will just skin the joints in a very harsh way without too much fall off, and then I will just smooth the weights using NGskintools and pray for the best. This is difficult going because all these joints have no hierarchy, so they're hard to pick. So this guy here, cheek joint R, I will just add a lot of weight to it as much as I can. In fact, I will just go fairly heavy on him. There you go. This guy in here will be pretty heavy as well. Eyebrow inner, this guy. And I will go like this for every joint that is on the right hand side. This is the most time consuming bit of the rig in my opinion, because there are plenty of joints in there. I will do only the right joints, of course. You will see how they move, because earlier on this influence was reserved to the head. For whichever reason, I'm going to fast forward a lot of these operations because they're just repeating over and over. This skinning here you can only do in practice by testing it, and then once you do the calisthenics for the face you will know if you're doing it right, because its result depends heavily on the rig. So every rig is different. We need to test it in the context of the rig. Nostril joint. This joint is in an odd placement for something which is being called the nostril joint. The eyelid. You definitely need to go a bit more out, I think. This is the upper lid base joint, so this whole area I think belongs to him. Sometimes you don't know what a joint does and you really need to move the control to see what it does. So you see, that's the area that belongs to that guy. And it's really the only way you have to check, and that's why calisthenics are so important, because they move every single joint around and they give you an idea of what's going on. So very important indeed. Okay, so one more thing, we are maybe going to select all the vertices there by expanding the selection, and we don't really need to work with this side of the face. We do not really want these joints which are very close to the mouth to be following any joint apart from the facial joints, like the jaw or so forth, or even the head really. So I will need to remove some of the joints, some of the vertices from the jaw in there, because I don't want them to follow the head, say these guys. And then I'm going to go into the component editor, and I have a bunch of joints in there. Of course, they're all listed. I'm looking for the neck and the joints of the head. These guys in here, they should not be affecting these vertices, because these vertices belong to the facial rig system if you think of it. So there is no sense in them, in the neck and the head, being responsible for that rotation. So I will zero out. You see it's very low anyway as an influence. So I will select the 3 columns, deselect the holding column, input 0, press enter, and they're gone. So we scroll to the right to see if we have the head somewhere as well. Nice, they're all facial joints. Now if I move the controller, I should get some pretty rough deformations in there. See that the deformations are not really that cool, but all in all, they should work. Let's see. I don't expect the jaw to work, but in fact it is working. I'm kind of impressed. Now when I rotate the head, I expect the face not to deform as much. You see, only that side deforms, which we didn't tweak. The left hand side doesn't. So now I'm going to try and first of all mirror the weights. So I prefer to do it in a T pose. Something going on here. There are some. I think I want to select all those controllers on the face and zero them out for safety. There you go. That's better. That's a T pose. I will save just in case, and using the old NGskin tools, I will initialize the layer, and then I will go mirror, and I will mirror from negative to positive X along the X. Now I should get perfectly matching deformations. You always want to remember to check the rest of the body just in case, you see it works. So we have our skinning, but as you can see, it's pretty brutal. Look at the way the eyelid closes down, for instance, or look at the way the mouth deforms in here. So we're going to perform a relaxation on these skin weights. Now, how should we relax this thing? If we relax the whole geometry, well, then we are relaxing everything. That doesn't work because we already relaxed parts of it, which is one more reason why it's a better idea in general to keep the face as a separate part. If we relax the face only, that's not going to work either. And I will show you why this is not going to work either. So let's have a look at the eye. See how the eyelid goes down to blink. You see that these vertices are following the joints one to one, and that's what ensures that the blink will work. If I now relax those weights, I'm going to change the position of these vertices on the edge of the eyelid, and the rig will be unable to blink properly. That's a bummer. So that means we can't relax anything which is very close to the edges of an opening, like the mouth, for instance, or the eyelid on this particular rig, because we need those edges to follow the joints. That's a bummer, but I think we have seen worse if you think of it. Perhaps we can select this edge loop, convert it to vertices, expand the selection until we leave about 3 edges before the edge of the eyelid. So something like this maybe will work. And then we can relax that area instead. What about that? That could kind of work. It would be easier to do the relaxation having the symmetry on, so that we are sure that we are relaxing the whole shape and not just half of the face. So for now, I will just relax the mask. I want to relax it, but not the edges very close to the eyelid. I'm relaxing both sides. So now I'm going to go to a frame where I have some sort of a blink. You see that one? And I'm going to relax with an intensity preset of medium. There you go. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Look at that. It's fantastic. Let's say that. So now you see that the deformation of the eyelids works quite nicely. Now let's do the mouth area. So I'm going to go in there and I need to select all the vertices that are in the lower part of the face, if you think of it. This will do, these will do, and the nose, that also will need relaxing, remember? I don't think I need these edges closest to the ear, and I certainly don't need the edges closest to the lips joints. So I'm going to deselect those edges, because these edges are going to work exactly like the eyelids. That is, we can't really smooth them too much, otherwise we will lose the shape of the mouth. The controllers won't move the edges the way we imagine. The problem with converting this selection to vertices is that it's still selecting. You see the vertices going down, and that's because we still have those edges selected. To remove them, you control left mouse button on one of them, then go to the next one and double control left mouse button click. There you go. You do the same for these guys, and you do the same for this micro edge. So control left mouse button and control left mouse button double click. There you go. And this guy as well, why not? So now I convert the selection to vertices. There you go. And I just, maybe I want to go to a pose which was giving me a problem, like this one. Look at that. That is interesting as a pose, is it not? And I'm going to relax. And you see that now the deformation is a lot gentler. And I can still go on and relax a lot more, but and you see how much cooler the deformation are in general right now. I think as a result, it's pretty good for something that costs us just a couple of clicks. Obviously, I can still go in there and skin stuff again and just tweak the skinning again and just relax again. This is an iterative process. You can go on forever. I'm going to save because right now we have a little bit of a problem. The eyebrows are no longer moving like the forehead. There is a bit of a mismatch in there because now the weight has changed. So I'm going to go back to a T-pose and I'm going to delete the history on the eyebrows so that they are no longer skinned. Combine them as a single eyebrow, delete the history again so that I don't have unnecessary history in the model. I need to find the joints that are driving the face, all these guys. I need to add to the selection the eyebrows and I need to bind them, but they won't deform the same way. So we need to transfer the weights. This might crash. I will use the new NGskin tools for that. I'm very curious to see if that works. And you see that on the face, the new NGskin tools finds the old NGskin tools layers. It's a good idea in my opinion to just delete the custom nodes from NGskin tools of either version, just so that you keep the weight but you don't have the necessary nodes. They will make your scene bigger. And then I'm going to initialize the skinning layers on both the shapes. If I just transferred using the tools transfer layer in there, I think I will get a crash. Let's see, I will save. Pretty sure I will get a crash. I think it's a very complex operation, although it seems pretty trivial. Maybe I won't keep the existing layer. I don't really need that. So I select the original shape first, the eyebrows next, and transfer. I think it's crashing. Oh, I think it worked. Oh, it crashed. There you go. And here I'm back with my old file. I didn't really need to be convinced about the fact that it could have crashed, but the things I don't do for you guys. And this time around I will go File, Export Layers to JSON, and I will call this thing Working Weights. because they work. And then I will grab the eyebrows, and I will go File, Import Layers, and I will import the working weights.json, closest point on surface. It didn't crash, and you see that now the eyebrows are working one-to-one with the forehead. Not bad, not bad. Before concluding, I would really like to thank David Hallows for sponsoring this video. Without him, this video couldn't have been made. Also, I'd like to thank Saichuk Yaje for letting me use his model for this video. If you found this useful, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Have fun!
Hmm?